start this countdown, we have the Kosu artifact. In 1963, 3 rock hunters were exploring the mountains of eastern California with hopes to find geodes to sell at their gift shop. They gathered a bunch of them and took them home, where they proceeded to cut them in half. However, one of the geodes practically broke their new crystal saw in half when trying to cut it open. Instead of finding crystals, they actually discovered something more intriguing. Inside the rock mass was a perfectly circular porcelain-like section. In the center of the section was a tiny magnetic pin. An X-ray of the rock revealed that there was also a spring or helix at one of the ends. From there, people realized that it resembles a modern-day spark plug. However, it is theorized that this rock is around 500,000 years old. But spark plugs were not invented until the 19th century. So this has left people thinking that it's proof of alien visitors, saying that it came from their spacecraft. Meaning, they're way more clever than we realized, since they created this technology thousands of years before we did. Others believe that it was left behind by time travelers. Then you have the skeptics that have tried to debunk it by saying it simply was just a spark plug from the 1920s and then someone threw it out, so it's just a piece of someone's trash that we're all hyping up. But honestly, you choose what you want to believe. In our 9th spot, we have the Roswell Rock. The Roswell Rock, as featured in a couple of episodes of the show Ancient Aliens, is a very weird rock with a detailed design. The rock is uniform in color, unusually smooth, and has a design protruding from the surface of it. This rock was found in Roswell, New Mexico in 2004. A man named Robert Ridge, a deer hunter, apparently found this rock half sticking out of the ground. He also discovered that it had strange magnetic properties. Upon analyzing it, people have realized that the rock's design exactly matches a crop circle that was found in England in 1996. Some people believe that it's just a man-made copy of the crop circles. Other people believe that it conveys some sort of message from aliens. After experts have analyzed the design, they noticed that it's a pattern of a sun and a moon inside a circle. Linda Moulton Howe, an investigative journalist, believes that the sun, moon, and skies are present throughout the solar system and all the galaxies, meaning maybe aliens are trying to teach us about astronomy. Or the rock contains some sort of date for some event that has happened or will happen. Making our way down the list at number 8, we have the ancient airplane. Researchers have noticed that the Incas left behind some very interesting objects. One of the more notable ones are the figures that are small and golden that closely resemble modern jet planes. Upon analyzing them, people have noticed that the figures have what appears to be wings, a stabilizing tail, and landing gears. Ancient astronaut theorists believe that they are a figure of planes. But we know that planes were not created back then. This has led people to believe that they indeed were in contact with extraterrestrials that had advanced technology. Whereas others think they're supposed to represent flying creatures like bees or fish. But again, it's for you to decide. Coming in at number 7, we have the alien head. Okay, this one, I can't lie, it's pretty weird. In 2017, a man in Cusco came forward with an artifact that he claims he found in the southern desert of Peru. This artifact appears to be a mummified life form, eerily resembling an alien. An X-ray concluded that the skull had angled eyelids with shallow eye sockets, 2 nostrils, and a narrow slit-type mouth. Under the skull, you can see exposed bone. Now, the skull is covered in a type of clay that gives the skull a more alien-type appearance. But it is discovered that it is a real skull. But it isn't concluded that if it's an alien skull or if it's just an animal skull that has been preserved and then morphed in appearance because of the clay coating. But what's weird is apparently there have been tons of skulls discovered in Peru. Lots of them have elongated skulls, which aliens are said to have. Maybe it's evidence that alien species were once inhabitants there. In our 6th spot, we have the alien hands. Okay, this is where it gets even weirder. In the same area where the skull was found, they found a hand with only 3 elongated fingers. It has nothing to do with the previously mentioned skull though. The skull is tiny, whereas the hand is larger than a human hand. So this hand type thing is said to be made of bone type material and some kind of skin. Just like the skull, the hand is also coated with clay. X-rays of this hand show that each finger has 6 bones. Human hands only have 3. Each of the fingers also contains something that is thought to be a fingernail, but we don't know exactly what creature this hand is from. Some thinks that it's from an animal, others are convinced that it indeed is an alien hand. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Gosford glyphs. The Gosford glyphs refer to the rock carvings that seem to resemble ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics that were found in New South Wales. In Brisbane Water National Park, there is a site that contains 2 8-foot-high walls that contain over 300 carvings. It is said that these glyphs are about 4,600 years old. Experts have ended up decoding the glyphs and say that in one section it talks about 2 brothers coming here from Egypt. They got shipwrecked on this land and one got bitten by a snake and passed away. But the most striking carving is one that looks like an alien spaceship. It has a classic UFO shape with rays shooting down. Egyptologists are confused by this carving as it doesn't fit in with all the other ones, but they believe that it had to be significant in order for them to carve it. Ancient astronaut theorists believe that these markings show that people have been in contact with aliens before. In our 4th spot, we have the UFO tooth wheel. A Russian man was using coal to heat his home when he realized something odd sticking out of one of the pieces of coal. Researchers stated that it looked like a toothed wheel. Testing of this object revealed that it was 98% aluminum and 2% magnesium. What's weird is humans didn't learn to make aluminum until 1825, but this coal piece is 300 million years old, and the tooth object appears to be artificially made. This object resembles parts that are used in things like microscopes or electronic devices. So, who created this object and what was it originally used for? Scientists are still conducting tests on the object with hopes of uncovering the answers to those questions. In our 3rd spot, we have the Betts Mystery Sphere. On March 27, 1974, the Betts family were out examining a small brush fire near their property. While doing so, the family came across a completely smooth metal sphere about the size of a bowling ball. On the sphere, there was a triangle engraved on it. They took it home only to find out that it had very strange properties. One day when the Betts son was playing his guitar in the same room as the sphere started to emit a throbbing sound from it. The sound was strong enough to hurt the family's dog's ears. This sphere could also change direction, so if you pushed it or rolled it across the floor, it could roll forward, stop, and then roll right back to you. It was also said to be able to absorb power from solar energy, as it would be more active when exposed to the sun. The sphere would also sometimes emit vibrations as if something was operating on the inside of it. Now, they refused to let anyone analyze it until they linked the sphere to paranormal activity that started happening around their house. Like doors would slam or they would hear organ music around the house. So then they let scientists analyze it and said that it was just a normal sphere. But the family is convinced that something is controlling it. Maybe something of the extraterrestrial nature. Moving on at number 2, we have the brass bell. In 1944, a 10-year-old boy by the name of Newton Anderson was shoveling coal into his furnace at his home. That's when a piece of coal was dropped and broke in half. Inside the coal revealed a mysterious bell. The coal that he was using was said to be about 300 million years old. Back then, the dominant life form on Earth was insects. So how could it have been manufactured back then? Also, the bell contained an unusual mixture of metals including copper, zinc, tin, arsenic, iodine, and selenium. Not a typical combination used to make objects. Now, a man named Boris Billis ended up taking the bell to the geology department at the University of Delaware. From there, they conducted studies and discovered that the bell was handmade. Now, of course, people were skeptical, thinking that the boy lied and didn't find the bell in coal. But in 2007, he underwent a polygraph test conducted by a specialist who worked on death row cases. It was discovered that he was indeed telling the truth. His report has even posted online for others to see. So people again have linked this strange object to aliens. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Wedge of Aiud. In 1974, construction workers in Romania were working in a village in Aiud. They were working near a river when they found a collection of strange objects buried 30 feet in the sand. 2 of the objects were bones from mastodons, which are very distant relatives of the elephant. Beside the bones laid a mysterious wedge-shaped object. This object contained 89% aluminum, 6% copper, and a total of 12 elements altogether. Like I mentioned previously, aluminum wasn't discovered until around 1825. Yet this wedge lay next to bones that are from around 11,000 years ago. The wedge itself is theorized to be around 10,000 years old. People believe that this object just couldn't have existed back then. An aeronautical engineer stated that this object looks exactly like a piece of a landing gear for landing aircraft. This has left researchers to believe that extraterrestrials crashed here around 11,000 years ago, and this piece is part of their spacecraft.
Kicking off the list at number 10, ancient Sumerians. The Mesopotamian civilization was formed in what's now Iraq and Kuwait. Now these civilizations began around the Neolithic Revolution, so around 12,000 BCE, give or take. Now sometimes it's referred to as the cradle of civilization because Mesopotamia was one of the first places to develop agriculture, being right in the middle of Egyptian and Indus Valley civilizations. So of course there are these ancient Sumerian tablets, and in these tablets we start to question our own history. In 1842, British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard discovered ruins of this great royal archive, just thousands of tablets made of clay. Pretty much the world's oldest overdue library books, just so dusty. These tablets showed Sumerians engaging in a social night. This scene here depicts a banquet from around 2600 BC. That was actually the world's first bender, believe it or not, fun fact. Ancient gods of Mesopotamia were said to have wings and the ability to control all of humanity. These gods were the Anunnaki, and some believe they were 8 feet tall, and they were also aliens from another planet. The Sumerians wrote one of the oldest tales in human history. They wrote the Epic of Gilgamesh, so maybe these alien gods inspired them, perhaps. I don't know. I'd probably write a book if 8-foot-tall winged gods landed in my crops. I'd probably write 2 books, in fact. Number 9, Sumer. The National Museum of Iraq is home to many ancient artifacts, and it has the Nimrod gold collection, just this fancy jewelry from the 9th century. It also has Uruk tablets from 3000 BCE, and these ancient jars with mysterious designs, one of which was this. This piece was made around 4000 BC, and it shows a creature that resembles a human, or an alien. It's basically got big eyes, lanky arms, a long body, a long neck. Is this me? Am I a time traveler? What's going on here? Many believe that this is evidence of early visitors. Even an Iraqi minister claimed that ancient Sumerians would visit Pluto in advanced spacecraft 1,000 years back. Their transport minister told reporters that the world's first ancient alien airport was built there in 5000 BC. That's a hard fact. The civilization of Sumer, according to Kazim Finjan, was an alien airport. Nice, sounds good. Be there soon. Quick pit stop at Uranus. Lol. Number 8, the Madonna with Saint Giovanni. For this next one, we'll be taking a look at a painting from the 15th century, #art. By artist Domenico Ghirlandaio, this painting is currently in the Hall of Hercules in Palazzo Vecchio in Florence. The painting shows the Virgin Mary, the infant Jesus, and St. John the Baptist. Now the old baby Jesus was lying on the woman's garments, and over her right shoulder we can see this object floating in the sky. And what's even more interesting is that a man is looking up at said object, and he's even covering his eyes from the sun to get a better look. Also, this dog is barking at this object in the sky, so something is afoot. Art historians believe the flying saucer is an angel resembling a cloud, while others believe it's a clear sign of alien visitors. What do you guys think? Was this the 15th century version of drawing the sun at the top corner of your painting, or did this mystery artist document UFO footage with his own brush? Sound off in the comments below. Number 7, the pyramids of Egypt. Built over 4,500 years ago, the pyramids of Giza are these massive tombs where ancient pharaohs and queens were laid to rest. Around 15 million visitors get an up-close look at these beautiful structures once a year, and for a long time, we've speculated just how these incredible things were built. Well, Tesla CEO Elon Musk put forth his hot take on the matter, and he claims the landmark was built by aliens. The guy's pretty much an alien himself. A guy who launches cars into space for fun also believes in aliens. July 31st, 2020, Elon simply tweeted, "Aliens built the pyramids, obvi." Now, since that tweet, Egypt's International Cooperation Minister has called out Elon, asking for him and the rest of SpaceX to check out the tombs of the pyramid builders. Until the early 20th century, the pyramid built for the pharaoh Khufu was the largest building on the planet. Laborers had to move 6.5 million tons of stone with only wood and rope. The 3 largest pyramids of Giza have a deep connection as well to the cosmos. The stars of the constellation Orion were once associated with Osiris, the ancient Egyptian god of rebirth and afterlife. Another huge theory is that an advanced race of aliens came to Earth with all this future technology, and that's how they were able to build these pyramids. Which I gotta say, I kind of believe that more. That's pretty, I can't even lift a box without pulling my back out, let alone a pyramid. Number 6, Antikythera mechanism. After being submerged for over 2,000 years, we believe we found the oldest known analog computer. In 1901, near the Greek island Antikythera, divers found a Roman shipwreck full of treasure, jewelry, statues, and an ancient planetary alignment device. In 1959, Derek de Soya Price discovered its true purpose. Now, for many years, nobody really knew what this thing was, obviously. It looks like rusted junk. It was to keep track of the planets and the moon. They didn't have a horoscope app back then to look at while they're on the bus. They had to align this mechanism with the month of the year. Now, one of the gears was specifically designed to keep track of when the next Olympics are, which is pretty hilarious. You can never be too early, I guess. Of course, there's theories that aliens left this piece of technology behind because of how advanced it is, and that would make sense. They came to Earth to watch the Olympics, watch some guy huck a javelin, some deep space entertainment. I back this theory, let's do it. Number 5, the Nazca Line. We've all heard of alien crop circles at one point or another. I mean, I myself remember watching the movie Signs when I was younger and I couldn't sleep for like 13 years. I don't know. So this next one obviously freaked me out. Just 200 miles southeast of Peru, we can find hundreds of markings etched into the earth. They're massive pieces of art, like crop circles, but more intimidating, one would say. The biggest ground graffiti spans over 1,200 feet, and many believe this was an ancient ritual for water. Given its location, that theory certainly checks out. Another theory, written in 1968 in Eric von Daniken's book Chariot of the Gods, suggests that ancient Nazca was a site for alien visitors, which is why we're here now. Leaving behind knowledge in the form of these massive doodles, as well as technology like we talked about earlier. Number 4, Sacsayhuaman. Located in Peruvian Andes, this fortress was built by the Inca way back in the 15th century, just outside of the Inca capital of Cusco. It was made out of these massive, giant rocks, but the intriguing part is just how these rocks connect with one another. They looked perfectly chiseled to fit, almost like it was broken and then pieced back together. These 1,000-year-old walls are made of incredibly heavy stone, over 350 tons each, and they weren't just rolled down a hill or two, they had to be moved more than 20 miles to make up this fortress. We've recently discovered that ropes and pulley systems were used, they were definitely a part in this, but we also have to mention the elongated skulls that were found in the 1920s by archaeologist Giulio Citella. Were these skulls formed using binding techniques, or is this an alien graveyard for the builders of said fortress? Who knows? Number 3, Easter Island, Moai. These massive ancient statues have been quite popular in pop culture. They're pretty interesting to look at, but they're also pretty creepy. Reaching up to 13 feet tall and weighing over 80 tons, the indigenous Rapa Nui claim that these statues once roamed the land. That is so scary. 18th century Europeans had no idea how these things were built, but many were convinced that these statues were moving by themselves. Are aliens levitating these stones? Are they playing the world's largest game of chess? Or did humans somehow move these 1,000-pound rocks around with just their hands and they just pushed them as hard as they could? Another theory is that aliens of course built this in their own image, which is pretty badass. They're like, here, look at these giant statues, remember our faces. Number 2, Chichen Itza. Once a booming city with a diverse population, Chichen Itza was a Mayan city located in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Now the Itza were a group of Mayans who had power in the northern part of the peninsula, right where this city was. Its main attraction is of course this ancient pyramid. If you've seen the movie The Ruins, you'll recognize this area and also get goosebumps. Instead of evil plant life, the pyramid does include signs of alien life. These hieroglyphs included advanced mathematics, and they say that it was bestowed upon them from the gods. Recently, about 200 artifacts were discovered in a cave under Chichen Itza, and also a lost city the size of Manhattan was found underground. The most interesting claim of alien life are these UFO landing sites also hidden deep in the surrounding jungles. Aliens definitely built this, and this is where they first lived. That's my claim. And finally, number 1, the lost city of the Incas. Currently a wonder of the modern world, Machu Picchu was built over 500 years ago. It was first discovered in 1911 by archaeologist Hiram Bingham when he and a small team were originally heading out to find the ancient city of Vilcabamba. But during their commute from Cuzco, they found this landmark. Many of these stones of course weighed a lot, over 50 tons, and with Machu Picchu translating to Old Mountain, this seems like an impossible build from the Inca. The city is designed perfectly. I mean, after 500 years of foul weather, even earthquakes have yet to destroy this ancient city. It's pretty impressive. Just like in the Peruvian Andes, elongated skulls were too found at this site. Another sign of Inca royalty or another sign of alien builders. You already know my guess. Kicking off the list at number 10. EA6736. Ancient Egyptians worshipped lots of animals. At one point or another, you've heard about how cats were highly respected back then, but they also worshipped other animals as well. It's not just cats, okay? So if you're sitting there looking at Mr. Freckles or whatever, don't give him too much praise, okay? There's other worshipped animals to talk about, like baboons. Believe it or not, baboons. They were pretty important pieces to this ancient puzzle. Egyptians had tattoos of baboons, but the most famous piece of history that we have preserved is in the collections of the British Museum in London. There's a mummy on display and it looks a little different than the rest. EA6736 was recovered from the Temple of Khans in Luxor, Egypt. This little man here dates back to the New Kingdom period, so anywhere around 1550 BC to 10 BC. So yeah, he's a little old. He looks great for his age though, I mean really. Baboons would appear all over art and religion in ancient Egypt. One of my favorite facts ever has to be that in ancient Egypt, pharaohs would train baboons to make arrests. Yeah, imagine stealing a pear for your family and then 4 baboons start chasing you, doing parkour, jumping over houses. It's crazy. Baboons are so smart. No wonder they worship them, honestly. Number 9, Enkidu. This queen was ruling during the 18th dynasty of Egypt. The pharaoh Akhenaton, this was his daughter. She followed in her father's footsteps and was a great ruler, but she was also the wife and half-brother of one King Tut. Her and King Tut had the same father, but their mothers were different. After King Tut's death, however, it's believed this queen may have married the pharaoh shortly after. And perhaps she's buried near him currently in the Valley of the Monkeys. That's why we can't find her. Back in 2010, DNA testing was being done in tomb KB21, where 2 18th dynasty queens were recovered from that tomb in the Valley of the Kings, but not enough data was found from the mummies, but they do know the DNA is from the 18th dynasty royal bloodline, so we're getting closer. In another tomb though, KB63, numerous coffins were found. One had an imprint of a woman on it, along with jewelry, women's clothing, but the biggest clue really was pottery fragments. Of course. We've all played Assassin's Creed. The truth is in the scenery, my friends. The name Patan was on these pottery fragments, and the only person to ever use this name was the lost queen of Enkidu. So we're getting close, but let's maybe, stop destroying other graves in the process. Let's try and find a nicer way to do it. Let's keep hers a secret, maybe. Number 8, King Ramses VIII. Number 8, the 8th. You know what I'm doing. The last son of Ramses III, King Ramses VIII. He's the 7th pharaoh of the 20th dynasty. King Ramses VIII. Okay, history is confusing with these numbers sometimes, I tell ya. I had to proofread that sentence a few times when scripting this one up. This lost king had the throne for a very short amount of time, and historians are trying to understand why. He was the only pharaoh of the 20th dynasty whose tomb is still out there, somewhere in the Valley of the Kings, just waiting. The thing is, with his ruling being so short, the theory out there is that the tomb of KV19 that belonged to the son of Ramses IX, many believe this tomb was originally built for Ramses VIII, but once he became king, everybody was like, maybe not this guy, Yeah, you're not that guy, pal. Apparently you're not that guy. Apparently you weren't that guy. There is a confirmed tomb that was never used for Ramses VIII as well, tomb QV43 in the Valley of the Queens. Made for him, but never used. The poor souls who had to build these, my gosh. Number 7, Luxor tomb. We've been saying 2,500 years ago a lot, and don't get me wrong, that's an awful long time ago with all this ancient history. But in 2014, archaeologists discovered a 4,000-year-old tomb from the 11th dynasty. Yeah, it was tucked away in Luxor, Egypt all this time. Spanish archaeologists found a tomb belonging to a leader from the 11th dynasty. It's pretty obvious this was somebody from the royal family or somebody who was a high-ranking official, because at the time, Luxor was the capital city of ancient Egypt. Officials believe this tomb could have been used as a mass grave due to the, large amount of human remains found inside. That's a pretty jarring clue. It's important to note that this tomb had also been used during the 17th dynasty because tools and utensils from later on in that time were also found in this tomb. We're gonna find a spork in 5,000 years and be like, yes, ancient tools for Gogurt. Number 6, the animal tombs. This tomb was found, as you may have guessed, in the Valley of the Kings, like all the great ones here. But this one doesn't sound like the rest. For starters, it's a number rather than a name. What in the Elon Musk is happening here? Whose name was a number? What? Tomb KV50 and KV51 and this one as well all form a group referred to as the animal tombs. Underneath 6 feet of debris, the entrance to these tombs were found. So when we enter a tomb normally that's been untouched, ideally for thousands of years, we can find anything. In fact, whatever they do find, it's a win, I guess. It helps complete this age-long puzzle. So when officials opened KV52 and it was completely empty, that doesn't feel too nice. That's not very warming. It was empty except for 2 boxes, both black and undecorated. The larger of the 2 contained the remains of a monkey, and the smaller one was a chest and it had 4 compartments. Yeah, hauntingly bare compared to what else we have on this list coming up. Number 5. KV55. Okay, we covered KV50, 52, they're all one tomb, but they're not, they're separate tombs. What's going on here? This one was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb, and the reason we call this tomb by a number rather than a name is because, well, we don't know who it was made for, really. The classic, what happened, you know? Even the walls of the tomb inside, they're empty. They aren't covered with any hieroglyphs. There's no artwork, there isn't any clothing laying around, no jewelry. It's quite odd. It's just simply bare. As you walk down the 20 steps towards KV55, you'll notice only a few markings on the entrance. Markings that show that the entrance was once widened since it was first cut, along with its ceiling being raised slightly higher. So adjustments were made at some point. This wasn't a forgotten project by any means. The only hint as to who or what is buried here is remains on the walls. One hieroglyph was found in 1907. One hieroglyph, that's it. And it translates to, "The evil one shall not live again." Okay, so we should leave this alone, right? Yeah, you agree? Hit that thumbs up if you agree. I feel like we agree. Number 4. Ankh-Mahor curse. The walls of some of these tombs have warnings from the gods. One warning trespassers that the gods will wring their neck like that of a goose. That's a pretty good warning. I don't know. If I walked into somebody's property now and it said trespassers' necks will be wrung out like a goose, I'd turn around. You got me. You don't need a beware of dog sign. We're all set with that. You don't need to be an ancient god to get that message across. Just don't break into people's stuff. Don't steal stuff. Inside the found tomb of Ankh-Mahor, a pharaoh official from 4,000 years ago, a curse was written on the walls. It was buried in mastaba. It was an above ground massive tomb, and this warning was the first thing you saw. "Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property." It also warns of Ankh-Mahor's knowledge of secret spells and magic. And it threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. Again, there's that or beware of dog. You can pick which one you want to put in front of your building. What's more impactful for your property? You decide. Number 3, 2020 tombs. 2020, okay, while most of the world was stuck inside watching documentaries, more than 100 sealed coffins were found. And yes, this time they were occupied. Gross. Found, of course, in Saqqara, Egypt, Egyptian archaeologists have never been more excited, which is a weird thing to say after what I just said. Maybe we'll find the body of Cleopatra. Wouldn't that just be dandy, I guess? The fact that we found over 100 of these still in great shape is mind-blowing. It's actually pretty awesome. Grave robbers have been around since ancient Egyptian days, and for all these to be untouched for this long, that's good. This is great. I'm glad we found it instead of, pirates. The findings date back to 712 BC, which was a period where Egypt was controlled by foreign civilizations, like Persians or Greeks. The idea that we're finding mummies is great and all, but again, do we really need to open them up? Do we need to find Alexander the Great this badly? Like, what is he? It's gonna be bones. It's gonna be goop. Like, we're willing to disrespect this many souls in the process. It's kind of ironic. I don't know. Number 2, Black Tomb. We found a mysterious black granite tomb in Alexandria back in 2018. I remember this trending because I made several Brendan Fraser jokes on Twitter. Yeah, a lot of mummy talk happening that weekend. Things got real when the cousin of antiquities minister opened it up. Yeah, we just opened up a mysterious black granite tomb just because we're curious cats. When archaeologists found this massive untouched tomb, untouched for over 2,000 years, might I add. On one hand, that's a feat in itself, historical, great, discovery, awesome. But us humans, we have to just open it up and take a peek and just smell whatever's inside. Let's just do that, I guess. Maybe it's Alexander the Great, who knows? Egyptian news outlet El Watan reported that the tomb was lifted only a few centimeters before every official involved at the construction site fled the scene. They straight up ran away, it smelled that bad. Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, the guy put his entire head in the tomb to make sure that it's safe. I mean, or you could just do this with your hand. That works. Why your head? Like, just do one of these. I mean, I get it. The guy's OG. Nothing ended up happening, I think. I don't know. Number 1, King Tut. One of the greatest mysteries is, of course, the history of the young King Tut. Really young. Younger than you might think. The young boy became pharaoh at age 9 in 1332 BC. During his time ruling, the young king had to face a country in conflict. It wasn't exactly a chill time. At this point, Egypt and Nubia were going head to head over land, and not even 10 years into ruling, the young pharaoh died at age 18. It wasn't until 1922 until he was seen again. Howard Carter discovered the tomb of the lost king, appropriately, as you would have guessed, in the Valley of the Kings. This is where we could have been more careful, historically. When King Tut was discovered, they tried to move his body out of the oil that was coating the coffin after this long. But in doing so, they damaged him. They were too rough. They were too excited with this, old ass dude. So now it's next to impossible to tell what really took his life at such an early age. Yeah, we kind of blew it. We have some ideas though. It's not entirely hopeless. It's believed that King Tut had a broken leg. After some 3D scans were done, it appears the king may have not been in the best shape prior. He may have fallen off a chariot and then simply just cracked his leg, and that's how he died. So if Tut passed at an early age out of nowhere, who was that tomb he was buried in really meant for? Some suggest the tomb was built for the lost queen Queen Nefertiti, but again, still trying to figure this one out because we haven't found her yet. The former antiquities minister doesn't believe this at all. He strongly stands by his belief that the lost queen was one of the female mummies found in the Valley of the Kings. Tut passed away at 19, so many believe his own burial chamber wasn't even done being built yet, so they just threw him in hers. How rude is that? History is pretty rude. I don't know. If I can sum up history, I'd say it's rude. Yeah, that's a fair word. We still haven't found her final resting place, but with the aid of technology and 3D scans, I have a feeling we're getting pretty close.
Back in 1925, King Tut's tomb was discovered by a man named Howard Carter and his team. However, this place was said to be cursed, and anyone who disturbed the rest of the king would die. It's also said that bad luck will fall on anyone who handles King Tut's body or other artifacts in the tomb. Well, several weeks after the opening of his coffin, Carter's team started to die mysteriously. One man accidentally cut open a mosquito bite while shaving, and it got infected and he died of blood poisoning shortly after. Another worker contracted a cold and died of pneumonia. So it's believed that they were victims of this curse. Starting off this countdown, we have the chariot. A really cool artifact found in King Tut's tomb was his chariot. The chariot was found dismantled, but they ended up reconstructing it for display. Okay, first off, how did they build that ancient thing without any blueprints? That's talent right there, because I struggle building IKEA furniture even with blueprints. Now, what makes this artifact significant is that it's theorized that the chariot might have been King Tut's cause of death. King Tut was found with a fractured lower leg, shattered pelvis, and ribs. A new analysis shows that he was crushed on one side of his body, likely while on his knees. So some believe that he fell from his chariot in a horrific accident and died. If this is the case, then that thing is most certainly cursed. Moving on at number 9, we have the meat mummy container. So apparently mummies get hungry on the way to the afterlife. As a result, they are often buried with food. The food is carefully preserved so that they can last a long time for their lengthy journey. This is done by preparing the meat for eating, then wrapping the meat in linen. So they basically mummify the meat. In King Tut's tomb, they found 48 containers of meat mummies. Guess King Tut is a big eater. Good thing that we took away his source of food from him. Like, come on guys, you're making the curse worse than it is. This dude's gonna be mad. I mean, I would be if people took away food from me. We all know how sacred food is. In our 8th spot, we have the toe and finger caps. This is one of the more odd items found in King Tut's tomb. So King Tut was found with gold toe caps on his feet and fingers. That's right. Just little golden covers for each individual toe and finger. These were placed on the divine after death so that their toes and fingers keep their shape. These were placed onto his body during mummification. It's also thought to protect the dead from magical dangers. Now, I'm hoping that they didn't remove these little caps from his body, but chances are they probably did. So if anything happens to his digits, boy, he's gonna be mad. Coming in at number 7, we have the woven gloves. Experts believe that this next piece is one of the few items that was actually used by King Tut while he was alive. International Egyptologist Tariq El-Awadi said, and I quote, "Most of the objects found in the tomb are ceremonial or designed to be used by the pharaoh in the afterlife." But he believes that these gloves were probably worn by King Tut, either during the wintertime or when he was riding his royal chariot. That's pretty cool. I mean, the gloves don't look too stylish, but I think all of these ancient artifacts are so amazing. Moving on to number 6, we have the canopic jars. As part of their burial process, Egyptians would place the internal organs of the dead into 4 jars before mummification. One jar had King Tut's lungs, another had his stomach, another had his intestines, and one was for his liver. And apparently I say intestines wrong. That's how it is in Canada. Sorry. The jars were found inside of an alabaster chest. It was thought that King Tut needed these organs in the afterlife, which is why they were preserved. Not only that, but 4 goddesses protected them. But now these jars have been moved to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, but his body is still in its original resting place. Great. So King Tut's body and his internal organs are kept separate. Bet he loves that. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the walking sticks. Among the countless artifacts Tut was buried with, a more interesting one would be his walking sticks. But he wasn't just buried with one walking stick. No, he was buried with 130 walking sticks. Why he needed that many is beyond me. So what we do know is that King Tut had a deformed left leg. People theorize that he had a rare bone disorder called Kohler's disease, and that's what caused this deformity. So it may just be that he needed a walking stick to get around. In fact, in tons of depictions he was drawn with this walking stick. Some think that it was just a royal staff. But with the newfound evidence of his foot, it's more likely that he needed them for mobility. And chances are, they're cursed. And they have been separated from King Tut's body, meaning he's stuck in the afterlife, probably hobbling around since we took away his sticks. Like, come on people, stop angering the king. Coming in at number 4, we have Anubis. Guarding the entrance of King Tut's tomb was a statue of a black jackal on top of a podium. This jackal is known as Anubis, the god of the afterlife. Anubis is said to protect the dead, guarding their spirits from trespassers. The jackal was 3 feet long, made of wood and plaster. This was then painted black, which is the symbolic color of Anubis. Black was chosen since it represents death and decay, but it also symbolizes the fertile soil of the Nile and regeneration. It's crazy how much detail was put into these things. So Anubis was placed outside of King Tut's tomb as kind of a no trespassing sign. But we trespassed, so now it's cursed. I mean, it's said that Anubis punishes the mortals who ignore its warning and disturb the dead. In our 3rd spot, we have Tut's burial mask. Tut's burial mask, otherwise known as a death mask, was found in King Tut's coffin resting directly on the shoulders of his mummy. Okay, with a name like Death Mask, gotta be cursed. So these masks were made to resemble the person that it was placed on. It was done so that the spirits could recognize the body after death and help them to the underworld. The mask was filled with oils which helped with the mummification process. Not only that, but at the back of the mask there was a protective spell inscribed into it. The spell was to protect Tut's limbs as he travels to the underworld. Now, according to rumors, Tut's beard on the mask was accidentally snapped off and then glued back on. So not only did they remove a protective mask from King Tut, but they broke it too. Yeah, King Tut is probably really upset about that. Let's hope this didn't interfere with him getting into the underworld. Coming in at number 2, we have King Tut. So obviously one of the biggest discoveries in King Tut's tomb was King Tut himself. He was buried in a coffin, placed inside another coffin, inside another coffin, inside another coffin. There were 8 coffins in total. So like I mentioned before, anyone that handles King Tut's body or his artifacts are said to be cursed. After Tut's body was found, he was sent to a radiologist to get x-rayed. The radiologist's name was Sir Archibald Douglas Reed. The next day, after conducting the x-ray, Reed fell sick. He died 3 days later. His death is blamed on King Tut's curse. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Cobra Staff. So this is where it gets interesting. Rumor has it that the reason why several men mysteriously died after the expedition was because one of the workers stole King Tut's Cobra Staff. Howard Carter claimed that when they found the tomb, it was already robbed. But he may have said that to cover up the fact that him and his team took a couple of artifacts as souvenirs, particularly the Cobra Staff. Ironically enough, one of Carter's team members, James Henry Breasted, returned home to find his pet canary eaten by a cobra, and the cobra was still occupying the cage. A cobra staff goes missing, and a cobra is found in his home. Coincidence? I think not. So what I learned from today's video is that King Tut has been separated from a lot of his artifacts. He is out there hungry, unable to walk, with broken fingers and toes, and without his protector or his organs. So yeah, chances are he's really pissed at us and is cursing us.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have KV55. This is a tomb that is referred to by a number rather than a name because we don't actually know who lies inside of the tomb. While this tomb had its modern discovery in 1907, we still haven't quite found the answers surrounding this mystery. To make things a little more eerie, while the walls of the actual tomb are bare, which is bizarre, as you walk down the steps towards the tomb, you'll notice that there are some markings leading up to it. You'll see inscribed on the wall of the entrance the words which can be translated to, quote, "The evil one shall not live again." If this wasn't enough to give you an unsettling feeling, the coffin inside of the tomb has been desecrated with part of the face having been removed as well. So all in all, we don't know a lot about what's going on down there, but it doesn't seem good. In our number 9 spot today, we have Chapter 17. Archaeologists had a large and very exciting discovery as the 4,200-year-old funerary temple of Queen Nerit, who was the wife of the pharaoh Teti, was found. The recently excavated Siraka necropolis was stocked full of incredible treasures. Inside there were over 50 wooden sarcophagi, there was a board game, a riverboat with rowers, statues, wooden masks, a shrine dedicated to the god of the dead Anubis, and there was a burial sanctuary dedicated to the queen. And while all of these are truly unbelievable finds, one of the most fascinating to researchers was a scroll from the Book of the Dead. The 13-foot-long papyrus scroll, which is referred to as Chapter 17 of the Book of the Dead, acts as a chilling guide to the afterlife. In our number 8 spot today, we have golden tongues. A team was working at a temple on the outskirts of the Egyptian city Alexandria when they discovered 16 burials in rock-cut tombs. It was here that they found some mummies that unfortunately had been poorly preserved over the last 2,000 years, but it was what they found with these mummies that was exceptionally interesting. Inside a few of the mummies' mouths were golden tongues nestled inside of their jawbones. It is thought that the dead were given these gold foil amulets that were shaped like tongues so that they could speak before the court of the god Osiris in the afterlife. Osiris is the god of fertility, agriculture, the afterlife, the dead, resurrection, life, and vegetation, and he was also the judge of the dead, so it is imperative that those headed to the afterlife impress him. When we break it down and understand why these gold tongues might have been placed with the bodies, it becomes less of a horrifying discovery and more of an absolutely fascinating one. In our number 7 spot today, we have 5,000-year-old tombs. While researchers were working in the Dakalia province in the area where the Nile River drains into the Mediterranean Sea, they found something unbelievable. It was here that they unearthed tombs that were over 5,000 years old. 68 tombs from 3,300 BC during the Buto period were located, along with 5 that were from 3,100 BC during the Nakata III period. Some of the Buto tombs were found with the human remains in a squatting position, while the Nakata period vessels were more cylindrical and pear-shaped. This cemetery combines some of the earliest periods of Egyptian history along with some of the most important eras. Other cool things found in this area included ovens, stoves, pottery vessels, as well as amulets and scarabs, some of which were made out of semi-precious stones. In our number 6 spot today, we have Marcus. Inside the necropolis of Porto Sarno, which was found in the ancient Roman city of Pompeii, a tomb was found which held the remains of Marcus Venerius Secundio, and these remains are the best preserved ones ever found in ruins. The partially mummified remains included hair and bones and even a partial ear, and they belonged to Marcus, who was a former slave who was able to rise through the ranks. This discovery was unusual because tests showed that Marcus died around the age of 60, and during Roman times adults were usually cremated. After being freed from slavery, Marcus was able to join a college of priests who were in charge of a form of emperor worship. Being buried inside of a tomb is a reflection of the fact that when he passed, he was in good social and economic standing. It is believed that this tomb dates back decades before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD destroyed Pompeii. In our number 5 spot today, we have Tomb Storeroom. During the excavations of a 2,600-year-old vast necropolis that sits just south of Cairo, researchers unearthed a tomb, of course, or else why would I be talking about it right now? But here's the thing about this specific tomb. It had a storeroom that was housing about 24 mummies. The tomb was located at the bottom of a 36 feet deep shaft, and the 22 mummies were found along the tomb walls. The mummies are believed to date back to 640 BC during the 26th dynasty, which was Egypt's last independent kingdom. Many of the mummies were unfortunately poorly preserved, so their identities as well as the reason why so many were put into one room is left as a bit of a mystery. In our number 4 spot today we have a Bronze Age tomb. Imagine you're a farmer in Ireland and one day you're just minding your own business and somehow manage to stumble upon an ancient tomb that's basically been untouched for thousands of years. Well, that's pretty much exactly what happened when a burial site was uncovered on southwest Ireland's Dingle Peninsula. Inside this site, researchers found human bones along with items that may give us some insights into prehistoric burial and death rituals. This tomb is believed to date back to the Bronze Age, but unlike other tombs from the time, this one was completely underground, which means that it may be even older than once suspected. The tomb was found during some land improvement work when literally a stone was turned over and it revealed the chamber underneath. In our number 3 spot today we have mice. A couple years ago in 2019, as archaeologists were searching through a well-preserved and beautifully painted tomb that had been found in the Egyptian town of Sohag, the tomb is thought to be from around 2,000 years ago and was built for a man named Tutu and his wife. Other than the human mummies that were found inside of this tomb, researchers also found animal mummies, including dozens of mummified mice. This tomb is one of 7 that were found in the area after authorities found smugglers digging illegally for artifacts, which honestly sounds like it should be the plot of a movie. While I'm sure these kinds of discoveries are insanely important and helpful for all kinds of researchers, finding dozens of mummified animals along with human mummies probably isn't the nicest discovery there's ever been. In our number 2 spot today we have a gibbon skull. Gibbons are a type of ape that are often characterized by their swinging ability coupled with their loud, bright calls, and the 8th century Chinese poet Li Bai described their voices as they swung past the Yangtze River. But here's the thing. Today, there are no gibbons that live anywhere near the river. Also, the gibbons that exist now have different fur patterns from the ones that are often depicted in classical Chinese paintings. This has led experts to believe that there must have been another kind of gibbon that has now vanished, and physical evidence of this kind of gibbon might have turned up in the most unexpected place: a tomb. This tomb, which was built for the grandmother of the first emperor of China nearly 2,300 years ago, contained a skull and a jawbone so distinct that scientists believe they must belong to this member of the now extinct gibbon genus. Many surviving gibbon species are now facing extinction, so it is likely that there were others in the past who unfortunately faced the same kind of fate. In our number 1 spot today we have canopic jars. This is a discovery that is actually quite a common find in tombs, but that doesn't make it a pleasant one, although there is a reasonable explanation behind this. Canopic jars are often found in tombs, and in 2018, in the tomb of Carabaskin, which was found on the west bank of Luxor, there were some well-preserved jars found. The jars were made of Egyptian alabaster, and they most likely held viscera. That's right, folks, these jars usually held the organs of the person inside of the tomb. They were used during the mummification process in order to store and preserve the organs so that they could be used in the afterlife. There wasn't just one jar, but rather a jar for specific organs. While in modern times this is a gruesome discovery, it's also absolutely fascinating to see how people of the past cared for those who have passed away, as well as seeing how strong the belief in the afterlife used to be.
Starting off this countdown, we have the booby traps. When pharaohs passed away, they were buried with all their belongings and a bunch of valuables. Because of this, they didn't want anyone raiding the tomb and disrupting the pharaoh's body. So basically, they designed booby traps / security systems. This includes rooms that led to nowhere, and fake walls that robbers would break thinking that there would be valuables behind it, only to find nothing. The scary part though, they also had false floors that would break upon stepping on them, and then the person would fall down into a death pit. Basically, a hole with spikes and spears. Ouch. So researchers need to be very careful when exploring these ancient ruins. One wrong step and that could be it for them. Moving on, at number 9, we have the missing body. In 1934, Djoser, the first king of the 3rd dynasty of Egypt, was found. I mean, kind of. Only his mummified left foot was found. It was detached from the rest of his body. Dude, that's so creepy. Like, where is the rest of his body then? To this day, his mummy has never been found. It's believed that maybe grave robbers got to his body, but we don't know for sure. Hey, maybe he just wasn't a fan of his left foot and wanted to be buried separately from it. I'm just kidding, but that is creepy as heck. He's not the only mummy who's missing though. His chancellor that was buried with him has never been found either. Weird. In our 8th spot today, we have the toxins. Exploring ancient Egyptian tombs and pyramids can be very deadly. In fact, a number of deaths that may have been caused by the ancient Egyptian curse might just be from the scientists coming in contact with deadly pathogens. Like, they're entering a place that has been opened in thousands of years. These places are home to dead bodies and dead animals and rotting food. In fact, researchers discovered that some ancient mummies carried mold. This type of mold can cause congestion or bleeding in the lungs. Also, bacteria such as Pseudomonas and Staphylococcus may grow on the tomb walls. On top of that, scientists have also detected ammonia gas, formaldehyde, and hydrogen sulfide all inside sealed sarcophagi. Discovering this must have been a huge wake-up call to them. It just goes to show how dangerous their job really is. They're potentially being exposed to life-threatening toxins. Moving on at number 7, we have the Valley of Mummies. In the mid-1990s, a team of archaeologists came across something pretty creepy. They unearthed 105 mummies all in the same vicinity. At least, originally, they thought it was just 105. In the end, they found hundreds more, but they believe that they haven't even found them all. They think there could be as many as 10,000 mummies out there. That is so creepy. Some of the mummies were even covered with creepy masks, others chest plates. Others, though, were just in plaster or linen coverings. In the end, they realized that the area was an ancient Egyptian graveyard. So that's great. They just dug up dead people and wonder why they get haunted or cursed. Like, come on, just let them rest in peace. Coming in at number 6, we have the canopic jars. As part of their burial process, Egyptians would place the internal organs of the dead into 4 jars before mummification. One jar had the person's lungs, the other the stomach, another had the intestines, and one for the liver. Why did they do this? Well, to preserve the organs, because it was thought that the person would need those organs in the afterlife. Now, imagine being the first archaeologist to find these jars. They're beautiful. The jar lids were carved with the heads of the 4 protectors. You had the baboon head, the jackal head, the falcon head, and the human head. So they were probably like, score, rare ancient Egyptian containers, whoa, until opening it up and finding dead parts inside. Sorry, but that must have reeked and then freaked them out. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the little coffins. Back in 1922, when Howard Carter and his team found King Tut's tomb, they also found something quite strange and unsettling. They found an undecorated wooden box in one of the burial chambers. Upon opening the box, they found 2 small infant-sized coffins in it. One coffin had "The Osiris" inscribed in it. The other had nothing. After opening the coffins, they found that they contained 2 mummified premature babies. Here's the creepy part. They were buried in King Tut's tomb, meaning they must have had some relation to him, meaning they were probably his kids. But one of the babies had some abnormalities and birth defects, and that these babies were ones he had with his sister. Isn't that just great? Coming in at number 4, we have the curses. Ancient Egyptian tombs and pyramids are filled with ancient curses. On a number of occasions, archaeologists have been exploring these ruins when they come across ancient curses inscribed on the walls. Let's take a look at a man named Zahi Hawass. He was on the team that excavated a tomb at the pyramid of Giza. That's when he encountered a curse. When translated, the curse read, and I quote, "All people who enter this tomb who will make evil against this tomb and destroy it, may the crocodile be against them in water, and snakes against them on land. May the hippopotamus be against them in water, the scorpion on land." End quote. Now, I'm not entirely sure what that means, but you know it's creepy and that they're pretty much doomed. Anyways, he claims that he was not superstitious, but the curse did freak him out. In the end, he later moved 2 child mummies and reported he was haunted by them in his dreams. This did not stop until the mummy of the children's father was reunited with them. Not gonna lie, that's really freaking creepy. In our 3rd spot today, we have the human sacrifice. During one excavation, archaeologists found several servants slaughtered and buried next to a pharaoh's tomb. Turns out that the Egyptians would sacrifice servants and other individuals when a pharaoh or person of power died. They did this because they thought that if they were buried alongside them, that they could continue serving them in the afterlife. Imagine how creepy it must have been unearthing all those dead bodies of people that were sacrificed. Extremely creepy. Moving on to number 2, we have King Tut's heart. So I think I know the reason why King Tut is mad and has released this curse on Earth. It's because his heart is freaking missing, okay? So like I said, all the vital organs were placed inside canopic jars. Now, the heart was very important to the Egyptians. The Egyptians thought that the heart was required for someone to get into afterlife. So it was always left in place, never removed. If it was accidentally removed, they made sure to always put it back in and sew it shut. But when King Tut's body was found, they discovered his heart was missing. Like, those things were preserved so they don't decay. So does that mean that somebody cut him open to steal his heart or what? Who really knows? But it is very creepy if you really think about it. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the mummified animals. So we all know that the Egyptians loved their cats. But did you know that the Egyptians used to brutally kill cats and other animals just to mummify them? Yeah. So apparently they had special farms that would breed cats, dogs, birds, reptiles, etc. These were then destined for mummification. So when someone died, they could bury them alongside these mummified animals. In fact, x-rays of some of these animals showed how gruesome their deaths were. How come we never learned about this in ancient history class? Like, that's dark.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the retainer sacrifice. During the first dynasty in Egypt about 5,000 years ago, people practiced a very particular form of human sacrifice. When a pharaoh or other noble died, their servants would also be killed so that they could serve them in the afterlife. Back then, the ancient Egyptians centered their whole culture and religion on the life to come. The pharaohs wanted to live as they had done in their normal lives, being served by those who had served them, surrounded by luxury and a life of ease. That's why they were always buried with great treasures, and in the early days they were surrounded by the bodies of their servants. It's thought that most, if not all, the servants were actually more than willing to be sacrificed. It's thought that they may have seen being sacrificed at their king's death as the only way to secure eternal life, which after all was the whole purpose of life to begin with. That's not to say they wouldn't feel the fear that any of us would if we knew we were about to be sacrificed. Next up at number 9 now, we have the spinning artifact. In 2013, a story went viral from Manchester Museum in England. Locked behind a glass cabinet, an ancient Egyptian statue had been inexplicably spinning in place. Even though nobody could actually touch it, the statue was spinning throughout the day. None of the other statues nearby were though. It was a 10-inch statue of Neb Sanu, which dates back nearly 4,000 years ago and was found in a mummy's tomb. This time-lapse video shows it turning during the day, but at night it remained totally still. As the story travelled, many people came to visit it and see this cursed object for themselves. Some pointed to the ancient Egyptian belief that if a mummy is destroyed, a statue like this can act as an alternative vessel for the spirit. So, was this statue really holding the spirit of a 4,000-year-old mummy? Well, some still think so, but it appears the spinning was actually caused by vibrations from buses outside and people walking through the museum. Since then, they glued the statue down and it hasn't moved anymore, for now at least. Next up at number 8 now, we have the burning. The ancient Egyptians believed that Ra was the sun god and that he created the world. He was revered and worshipped by the ancient Egyptians. That's why it was very serious if someone vandalized or robbed a temple that was dedicated to him. Those who were found guilty of disrespecting the sun god were burned alive. For the ancient Egyptians, this was seen as the ultimate insult to a person's dignity, as their spirit would have no body to dwell in. Next up at number 7 now, we have King Tut's curse. King Tut is the name for Tutankhamun, also known as the Boy King. In 1923, this young pharaoh's tomb was discovered by 2 archaeologists by the name of Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon. Now they found an inscription on the entrance to the tomb with these chilling words: "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." The archaeologists did not heed the warning though and entered the tomb anyway. They found treasures beyond anything that had been found before. The artifacts were taken out along with Tutankhamun's mummy and sent off to museums around the world. 6 weeks after this, Lord Carnarvon died. He was only the first though. After that, relatives of the people who opened the tomb kept dying in mysterious circumstances. One case involved their personal secretary being found dead in her bed, which in turn drove her father to suicide. In total, there were 11 deaths that have been linked to King Tut's curse. Some say they were just coincidences, others say there may be something to the curses of the ancient Egyptians. Moving on to number 6 now, we have the priest ghost. ghost. In 2017, ghost hunters caught what they believe to be the spirit of an ancient Egyptian priest on camera right next to his own tomb. Ghost hunting couple Sean Reynolds and Rebecca Palmer were standing in the tomb of a priest called Nasiamun. Now, he lived in ancient Egypt over 3,000 years ago, and his tomb is now in Leeds City Museum in England. They set up electrical readers to pick up energy signals and were starting to get quite freaked out when this happened.
Okay.
Oh God.
Oh my God, Paul, look. Oh, and that was me, but look, that's going off. No.
Just as Rebecca reported seeing an orb on her camera, a shadow of a person is seen darting across the floor towards the tomb. They said the top of the shadow was in the shape of a pointed hood and it walked straight towards that tomb. Now, they believe it could be the spirit of the priest, lost and wandering for eternity after his tomb has been moved thousands of miles away. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the Great Pyramids. These are perhaps some of the most famous landmarks left by the ancient Egyptians. They are tombs of pharaohs meant to help them reach the afterlife and become gods. As such, it's no surprise that some of them have haunted stories attached to them. Many eyewitnesses reports have recorded a man and his 3 children roaming around the Great Pyramids looking for something, who knows what. Some have presumed he is searching for his wife and the mother of his children. Another creepy story involving the haunting of the pyramids is Pharaoh Khufu himself emerging from the pyramid where he is buried. He is dressed in traditional ancient Egyptian armor. He appears at midnight and walks the streets, visiting houses and telling the inhabitants to leave the area. If ghosts have unfinished business to linger around here on Earth, it looks like Khufu has some serious unfinished business left. Next up at number 4 now, we have the confession. In ancient Egypt, police brutality was an everyday occurrence. It wasn't really a bad thing that people would protest about, it was just the way things were. It was the norm. When it came to extracting confessions from criminals, nothing was too far. Torture was a very common method used by the police. Torture victims were forced to name accomplices in crimes, to reveal the hiding place of stolen goods, and to describe the methods used in a crime through torture. Information on methods allowed the authorities to strengthen security measures. The most common torture method was called the bastinado, which involved beating the bottom of the foot with a stick. Moving on to number 3 now, we have the Titanic. Some people believe that an ancient Egyptian curse is responsible for sinking the Titanic. The story goes like this. There was once a mummy board called the Unlucky Mummy. It wasn't actually a mummy at all. It was a painted wooden board of an unidentified woman. When it was moved to the British Museum in London, staff began to report strange goings on. They would hear loud banging coming from the artifact. One man took a photograph of it and a picture looked nothing like the real thing. Its eyes stared furiously out of the picture and were described as malevolent. A few weeks later, the same photographer died in mysterious circumstances. A while later, one of the guards whose job it was to watch over the board also died. As the creepy stories mounted, the museum was said to get so sick of it that they sold the board to an American archaeologist. And so in 1912, he set sail with the mummy board from England to America. That ship was the Titanic. Some believe the mummy board was responsible for the sinking of the Titanic. Others say it never left England at all. Still an interesting story either way. Next up at number 2 now, we have the mummy ghosts. In 1699, Louis Pinnicher talked about one of the first mummy curses in his book called Treatise on Embalming. He told a story of a Polish man who had purchased 2 mummies from Alexandria in Egypt, hoping to study them for medical purposes. As he was sailing across the Mediterranean Sea, he began to have visions of 2 ghosts. They kept appearing on the boat and would somehow keep pace no matter how fast or slow they went. They could never quite lose them, but they could never actually catch up to them. The man ordered the crew to throw the mummies they had into the sea, despite the fact that he had just paid a handsome sum for them. As soon as that happened, it seems like the curse was lifted, the clouds parted, and the visions stopped altogether. And finally, number 1 now, we have love potions. While they may be resigned to fantasy in our modern times, alchemy, potions, and yes, even love potions were a very real thing for some ancient Egyptians. They could be used to win over the object of a person's affection, or just to cause trouble, enact revenge, or exploit people with the power of love. While that may sound interesting, the reality of how to make one is pretty grim, if I'm honest. One recipe involved taking the dandruff from the scalp of a dead person who had been murdered, mixing that with 7 grains of barley buried in the grave of a dead man, and crushing all of that together with 10 apple pips. Then add black dog's blood from a tick, some of your own blood, and a man's semen. Crush that all together, put it in a cup of wine, recite a formula, and bam, you've apparently got yourself a love potion, even if it did require a lot of death and murder.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Curse of Tutankhamun. As I see it, this one is either number 1 or number 10. This is probably the most famous mummy curse of all, so I could squeeze it into the number 1 spot, but also I want to keep this list a little bit unpredictable. This tomb was opened back in 1923, and on the wall of the tomb it read, "Death shall come on swift wings to those who disturb the peace of the pharaoh." That is a pretty clear message. I don't know why no one picked up on the fact that something was going to go down if they open up this tomb. But as we know, when it comes to colonizing, the people involved rarely pay attention to the negatives. The leader of this excavation died from blood poisoning, and 7 more people died prematurely. There's one thing that I will never do, and it is open up some old mummy tomb, because I don't need that bad mojo in my life. I only want good vibes that get brought on from drinking ocean spray and riding a longboard. Coming in at number 9, we have the severed hand. If you're super rich and powerful, I think you reach a point where you just start collecting things because you have nothing else to conquer. Instead of finding some sort of inner peace and moving away from material life, you just consume endlessly, trying to fill the empty void inside you, but trust me, it doesn't work. Sir Bruce Ingram was a rich and powerful person in England, and he had some friends who were digging up mummies in Egypt. One of his pals sent him over a mummy hand, and it was a gift, not something I would want to be sent. I'm more into practical gifts. I would be happier with a kettlebell. But something Ingram's friend should have told him was that there was a bracelet on the hand that said, "Curse be to he who moves my body." Yeah, I definitely prefer the kettlebell over a cursed mummy hand. Well, the curse came in full swing when Ingram's home caught on fire and then was hit by a flood. I guess in one way you could look at this as a blessing because water puts out fire, but his home was trashed. Coming in at number 8, we have the Curse of Senmut. Some curses haven't got the opportunity to activate. On the wall of Senmut's tomb it says, "His life shall not exist on earth." That's a pretty clear threat and a curse I don't want to dabble with. However, this guy might get his shot soon. People are currently working on this tomb to make it a public attraction. I'm sure one person going through there will slip up and get cursed. Also, the translation says, "His life shall not exist on earth," so I think ladies are free to visit. Coming in at number 7, we have Mummies on a Boat. Someone get Sam Jam on the phone. I have an idea for a movie. This story comes from 1699. Mummies must have been a huge hit back then. There was no TV, so digging up some old dusty bones with witchcraft attached to them would have been one of the most exciting things you could do. Well, in 1699, a book came out called Treatise of Embalming. There was apparently a true story in this book that talked about a man who was transporting 2 mummies he had just purchased via sailboat, and something very strange started happening. The ghost of the 2 men started to appear on the boat. These visions were terrifying and probably a warning that something worse was about to come. So this man did the intelligent thing and he threw the 2 mummies overboard. If he had kept them on board, they would have eaten him up faster than Joey Chestnut eats tube-shaped meat.
Oh, sorry, go. 3, 2, 1, go! It's the 100th anniversary and we are underway.
Coming at number 6, we have the Curse of Hemuru. This is a nice sounding curse on the wall of some guy's tomb. It reads, "I shall seize his neck like that of a goose." So this dude isn't going to put a curse on you that will give you some sort of sickness that takes you out. He's going to personally come to you and choke you to death. Also, they had geese in ancient Egypt? Who knew? I thought the first goose was born when Wayne Gretzky scored his first goal. Coming in at number 5, we have a cursed thief. Here's the thing. If you're gonna steal, you need to follow these tenets. Make sure you don't get caught. Make sure the item has high resale value, and make sure that the item you're stealing isn't cursed. If you follow those rules, you'll be a master thief before you know it. But this is one of the most famous stories in Don't Mess with Mummies. A German tourist decided he would visit an Egyptian tomb and steal something from a mummy. Little did he know you're not supposed to do that. The tourist eventually got extremely sick, became paralyzed, and then died from a mysterious cause. Now, what made this case so famous was when his stepson sent the cursed item back to Egypt. It arrived at the German embassy in Egypt with a note saying that the son felt in order to lift the curse from his family, he had to return the artifact to Egypt. Coming in at number 4, we have the Book of the Dead, a spell book from ancient Egypt that has been said to give the person who can control it the power to control the dead and walk amongst those from the afterlife. That sounds like quite the party trick. I don't know if that would be something I would mess around with in my day-to-day. I try to avoid death at all costs, so trying to decipher a cursed book of the dead sounds like it would give me the future I would not not be looking for. And it should be no surprise that Aaron Amber, one of the men involved in excavating the Book of the Dead, died just a few years after it was dug up. Him and his wife were hosting a wondrous dinner party. They were probably bragging about this amazing book they found, and someone made an offhanded joke about ancient Egypt, and then next thing you know, Amber's house was on fire and he died there. So I don't know if you want to try and read that book, but I think I'll skip the opportunity for supernatural powers at the risk of death. Coming in at number 3, we have The Curse Consumes You. I don't know what it would be like to be cursed. I can imagine it wouldn't be fun. I think it's probably the feeling you have when you haven't done your homework and you know it's due tomorrow, but you still don't do it, and now you just have to sit there in your anxiety while you continue to not do it. If anyone has survived an ancient Egyptian curse, let me know in the comments. But for archaeologist Hugh Evelyn White, it would seem that the curse was able to work its way into his soul and take his life. White was found dead after he committed suicide by hanging himself. White was an archaeologist who disturbed quite a few mummies in his day, so if curses are real, it's safe to say that this dude had a curse or two attached to him. Now this is where the urban legend surrounding his death works its way in. Apparently there was a note left behind that said, "I have succumbed to the curse which forces me to disappear." The note might be made up to add some spice to the story, but if it's real, you can bet I will never dig again just in case I bump into any mummies. Coming in at number 2 is the Curse of Osiris. You think if you were digging up a tomb in ancient Egypt and you found a statue of the god of death, you would just turn around and go home. Like, not even back to base camp. You would just pack up all your things, fly all the way home, and start working as a used car salesman. Just a complete fresh start. Well, some people aren't as quick to abandon ship as me, and maybe they should be, because back in 1971 there was an excavation of a mummy's tomb in Saqqara. The head Egyptologist came across a statue of Osiris, and instead of going through with the little game plan I just laid out, he removed the statue of the god of death from the tomb and took it back to his office with his assistants. Once him and his assistant were settled in, he stepped into the bathroom to relieve himself, and that's when his assistant heard screaming coming from the bathroom. He rushed in to find the Egyptologist on the ground. He succumbed to some sort of paralysis and then died the next day. So a mystery paralysis that kills you in less than 24 hours could be explained by medical science or a spell from the god of death. Coming in at the number 1 spot, we have Titanic mummy. We like to think that the Titanic sank because of human ignorance, and that's probably what happened. Saying that a boat was unsinkable in the early 20th century is one of the most insane claims you can make, but it's still fun to speculate on the supernatural. But this is how the story goes, and just so we're clear, the majority of this story is 100% true. There was a museum in England that was housing the mummy of the Princess of Anamera. It was a wonderful piece of history, but it was said to be cursed. Rumors of the curse being true seemed to solidify when a museum guard died out of nowhere. So the museum thought it would be a good idea to get this thing the hell out of there and then send it off to America. This priceless mummy from ancient Egypt worked its way onto the Titanic, and then we know what happened from there. Some people seem to think that it was the curse from this ancient mummy that brought down the unsinkable ship, and maybe they're right.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Cursed Workers' Tomb of Giza. A 4,500-year-old tomb has just been reopened near the Great Pyramid of Giza. The mass burial site in the Tribal Mountains was closed for nearly 30 years in order to protect it from thieves. The Giza Plateau tomb is thought to be cursed and contains the remains of high-profile workers. These basically weren't slaves, they were high profile and included the ancient royal palace supervisor Nefertiti. He is buried there with his 2 wives and his 18 children. He was busy. The tomb contains 2 fake doors, so clearly people weren't supposed to get in. Inscribed on the wall was the following curse warning: all people who enter this tomb who will make evil against this tomb and destroy it, may the crocodile be against them in the water and the snakes against them on the land. May the hippopotamus be against them in the water and the scorpions against them on the land. The tomb was reopened for the public recently in order to boost tourism in the area, but with that kind of warning, I'm not sure if I fancy a visit. Coming in at number 9, we have the Curse of Amenhotep. Curses aren't supposed to be funny, I get that, but I can't help but thinking that the Egyptians went a little overboard when inscribing the curse in the son of Hapo, Amenhotep's tomb. Let's have a little read, shall we? He who enters this tomb will lose their earthly possessions and honors, be incinerated in a furnace in excretion rites, capsize and drown at sea, have no successors, receive no tomb or funerary offerings of their own, and their bodies would decay because they will starve without sustenance, and their bones will perish. Cool! Basically, all of the bases are pretty much covered then. While his tomb was broken into, his sarcophagus hasn't actually been opened yet, as it has a very well preserved face mask. Probably best to keep it that way. Coming in at number 8, we have the Black Tomb of Osiris. Am I here for an eerie black tomb? No. No, I'm not. Am I here for an eerie black tomb belonging to the Egyptian god of the dead? Again, really, I'm gonna have to pass on opening that one up. In 2015, a 25th dynasty structure was unearthed near Luxor on the west bank of the River Nile. So Osiris was a mythological god of the dead, but it seems that the Egyptians made a tomb for him anyway. All ancient Egyptian burial chambers were associated with Osiris, as pharaohs and rich Egyptians wanted to be able to share the afterlife with him. If Osiris decorates normal tombs, who decorates his? Demons holding knives. That's who. Can't be good. The tomb was opened in 2015, a year still fraught with violent protests in the country. I don't know about you, but I think it could have been a bad idea to open the god of the dead's tomb. Just a hunch. Coming in at number 7, we have tombs with the donkey curse. You may not have learned this particularly gnarly piece of information at school when you were studying the ancient Egyptians, but a lot of 21st dynasty curses used to protect their wills, property and tombs in Egypt, and they were subject to a curse from the god Seth. Now, Seth was a god of storms, violence and deserts. He also happened to be a donkey. Anyway, curses involving Seth specifically said that he would rape those who entered the tombs. So, I mean, I wouldn't want to mess with a curse that promised a donkey would, well, you know. A donkey curse was famously found in the tomb of Der el-Bari Graffito, but we don't know if it actually, you know, never came to fruition, because who would admit to that? Coming into number 6, we have mummy soup. Very recently, in July 2018, a mystery tomb was opened in the Alexandria region. In it, archaeologists found a black granite sarcophagus dating back 2,000 years. As they began to lift the lid, a pungent smell stopped them in their tracks. Later, with masks and the Egyptian army in tow, the lid was lifted to reveal decomposed bodies. The family inside were buried, but their mummified remains had been exposed to the elements, and they were found as just bones in a pool of water. Water which presumably their bodies had dissolved in over time. Ugh. So far so good on the curse front, but these things seem to take a little time to manifest. Nonetheless, for me, the decomposed body water would have been enough to fill my nightmares forever. Did the mummy of Amun-Ra cause the Titanic to sink at number 5? A mysterious mummy thought to belong to the Princess of Amun-Ra was dug up in a vault in Luxor in the late 1800s, or so the story goes. 4 Englishmen were said to have drawn lots to buy the mummy in the 1890s, with one paying several £1,000s sterling to take the mummy. It seems that this man walked out into the desert later that day and never returned. Another of the men was shot, having to have his arm amputated. Another lost all his money, and another suffered a severe illness. Nonetheless, the coffin eventually reached England, where it caused all kinds of drama. It was eventually gifted to the British Museum, where it was later put up for sale for further chaos. Basically, the British Museum didn't want any of it. It was bringing bad luck to the building. The legend has it that the mummy was sold to a wealthy American and packed into the cargo hold of the RMS Titanic, and, well, we all know what happened there. A lot of people dismiss this as pure myth, as there was no evidence of a mummy in the cargo hold of the ship, but honestly, who knows? Coming into number 4, we have the Cosmic Void. The Heritage Innovation Preservation Project has been working with Cairo University and the Egyptian government to scan, yes, scan the Great Pyramids in Giza. In 2017, a pyramid housing the tomb of the great pharaoh Khufu showed a mysterious and spooky void when it was scanned. Built in 2560 BC, this weird void has been locked away and kept a secret for over 4,000 years. By scanning the pyramid with cosmic rays, the team behind the research estimate that the void is 98 feet long and 50 feet high, which is pretty big. What even is this void? Is it a black hole? Is it a curse? It seems to be just kind of nothingness, which in itself is pretty creepy to me. Some archaeologists are calling it an intentional design element, but what is it? It seems this void is completely sealed off from any known passageways inside the pyramid. There's no way to get at it, so how was it even built? So far, the Scan Pyramid team haven't ventured into the void yet, which honestly, I think is for the best. Who knows what kind of plague could be unearthed? Coming into number 3, we have the Catacombs Curse at Tuna el Gebel. Home to the tomb of Petasiris and Isidora, the Tuna el Gebel double acropolis was excavated by archaeologist Sami Gabra in the 1940s. Those who worked on the excavations in the area reported spells of dizziness, headaches, shortnesses of breath, and even in some cases seizures. At the time, the team thought that they had angered the ibis-headed god Thoth by disturbing the ancient curse. In reality, it was discovered that the tomb contained a lot of noxious gas, which probably explains the sickness. Either way, some would say they probably should have left the tomb well alone. Coming in at number 2, we have the two cursed mummies of Alexandria. In 1699, it was claimed by author Louis Penscher that a Polish man had purchased two mummies excavated from tombs in Alexandria. It seems the man wanted to study them for medicinal purposes, which actually was very common back in that era. Often people would resort to robbing graves so they could have bodies to study. Anyway, the mummies were taken on board a ship from Egypt to Poland on a voyage across the Mediterranean Sea. Unfortunately, removing the mummies from their tomb was a terrible idea. The man and his crew started to have violent and horrific nightmares, saying they were haunted by two ghosts. They soon realized the ghosts haunting them were the spirits of the mummies. They tossed them overboard, and as soon as the corpses were submerged in the sea, the visions stopped. Okay, finally, this was a mistake. A very big mistake. On February the 16th, 1923, the last chamber of King Tutankhamun's tomb was opened, and a whole can of cursed worms came out. This is all coming in to number 1. King Tut died when he was just a teenager in around 1400 BC. Fast forward 2,500 years, and archaeologist Howard Carter entered his sealed burial chamber and began the rumors of the Egyptian curse. The tomb was excavated and entered between November 1922 and February 1923. The tomb was, like almost all Egyptian tombs, inscribed with a curse, and this one seemed particularly potent. On the day Carter entered the tomb, a cobra got into his pet canary's cage with the bird dead in its mouth. Now, the cobra is the symbol of the Egyptian monarchy, and the symbolism wasn't lost on locals, who began to panic. Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer of the excavation project, died shortly after the tomb was first breached as a result of an infected mosquito bite. The bite possibly matched a healed lesion found on King Tut's cheek during his autopsy. Furthermore, two of Carnarvon's half-brothers died shortly after excavation. One of the doctors who worked on King Tut's body, radiologist Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, also died a year later, as did two other members of the excavation team, all within a few years of the tomb's opening. Coming into number 10, we have the man with a burnt leg. The man with a burnt leg is basically the Egyptian boogeyman. He's a horror character created to scare naughty children and is often mentioned by parents to kids when they're acting up. The legend says that he takes children away to eat them and cook them, which is pretty stressful, although why the burned leg? Well, apparently his burns come from him misbehaving as a child himself. He was disobedient to his parents. This is basically all I got from the translation, but maybe he was captured by a previous boogeyman, but escaped only to continue the legacy. Coming into number 9, we have the ghost of the White Desert. The Farafra Desert is regularly called the White Desert because of its large chalky rocks amid the sand. The desert is located between Dakhla and Bar Area, and there's a popular spot for tourism. Those who have visited the desert often have more to report on than its beauty though. It is said that the ghost of a disgraced pharaoh lives there. That's right, Pharaoh Akhenaten wanders the desert as a lost soul. Sightings of the 1300 BC king have been reported by many people. It seems that Akhenaten tried to abolish beliefs in the many Egyptian gods, trying to encourage a wider scale focus on the god of sun. A lot of people were very unhappy with this, and it seems that on his death, statues and monuments were destroyed or hidden. Worse than that though, it seems that priests cursed him to walk an eternity of wandering the desert aimlessly. Coming into number 8, we have the Dashur military training base. The Dashur military training base is one of the largest military bases in the Middle East and is well known for being a grueling training ground for soldiers. While a lot of secrets are kept surrounding the facility, it is said that the ground is haunted by soldiers who have either died there or imprinted on the facility. Some soldiers have said that they've heard shouts or gunshots in the middle of the night. They've woken up prepared thinking it's some kind of military drill, only to find out that there's no one around. Some even say that they've seen the ghost of a dead army general doing push-ups. Coming into number 7, we have El Nadahar. El Nadahar is a beautiful beautiful woman who lures men to the River Nile to their deaths. She is some kind of genie or siren and is described as being light-skinned with long flowing light hair. She wears a long semi-transparent dress and calls to men in a soft but very audible voice. El Nadaha became popular as an urban legend in the 1950s when children would play by the banks of the river and young men would chat there later into the evenings. The genie has often been sighted by men in pairs, both claiming to have been placed in a trance but eventually managing to get away. Perhaps men on their own have been one of the many bodies washed up later on the banks of the river. Others say she doesn't simply drown men but devours them too. Local law in rural areas along the Nile say that once a man has spotted El Nadaha, he is doomed to die. Coming into number 6, we have the Djinn. The Djinn are elemental spirits that live in the Egyptian deserts. They can be anything from cheeky dust devils or the eyes of raging storms. They often appear as sandstorms, small tornadoes, or snakes, and their primary aim seems to be bringing misery and chaos to humans. The desert Djinn can control the elements and mess with landmarks so that people get lost when wandering through the barren land. Coming into number 5, we have the City of the Dead. In Cairo, the truth is that 500,000 people are now living in a slum built on ancient cemetery, hence the name the City of the Dead. The El Afra graves date back to the 7th century, and a lot of the graves are small, elaborate buildings, which now some people have made their homes. These people are literally sleeping with ghosts. Aside from that, shanty houses have been put up amongst the graves and kids play on the tombstones as if nothing's happening. Despite the new choice of city locations seeming like a good idea for space saving, a lot of residents have reported ghostly apparitions passing by or the feeling of being watched while no one's around. Coming into number 4, we have Howard Carter's ghost. Famous Egyptologist Howard Carter, who discovered the tomb of King Tutankhamun, didn't die until 17 years after the notorious dig, but his ghost is said to haunt the Valley of the Kings. Howard Carter was born in the UK and lived in Norfolk until he became involved in Egyptology, aged just 17. British born but with Egypt in the heart, perhaps it makes sense that his ghost would haunt the spot he made the most important archaeological finding of the century, let alone his career. Now this leads me nicely onto our next point. We are, of course, talking about the Curse of the Pharaohs at number 3. This is an enduring urban legend in Egypt. While in ancient Egypt, many superstitions were observed during burial processes and people believed in the god's wrath. In the early 1900s, in an age of enlightenment, a lot of people were not so fazed by legendary curses. Indeed, Western archaeologists and historians decided that they wanted to prise open the pyramids, which had been sealed for thousands of years. Big mistake. When King Tutankhamun's tomb was opened in 1922, the legendary Curse of the Pharaohs was a main topic of conversation, with worldwide renewed belief in the legend. The team that excavated the tomb was quickly dogged by a number of untimely deaths. On the day Howard entered the tomb, a cobra got into his pet canary's cage with a dead bird in its mouth. Now the cobra is the symbol of the Egyptian monarchy, and the symbolism wasn't lost on locals who began to panic. Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer of the excavation project, died shortly after the tomb was breached as a result of infected mosquito bite. The bite possibly matched a healed lesion found on King Tut's cheek during his autopsy. 2 of Carnarvon's half-brothers also died shortly after the excavation. Basically, the whole thing was dogged with a lot of death and destruction. Keeping it in the Valley of the Kings at number 2, we have the Fiery Chariot. A lot of people have reported seeing the ghost of an Egyptian pharaoh haunting the Valley of the Kings, and in some ways, I'm not surprised after all of the curse talk. Tourists and staff at the Valley of the Kings have reported seeing a flaming chariot manned by a figure wearing pharaoh-style clothing being pulled by black phantom horses. The most common sightings are at night, and many people hear horses or the sound of a thundering chariot. Finally, coming into number 1, we have Baron Empaine's Palace. Baron Empaine's palace is situated in Heliopolis, but is modelled in the Hindu temple style of India and Cambodia. The palace was built in the 19th century by a Belgian millionaire, Baron Empaine, who fell in love with a beautiful young Egyptian girl. Building a mansion on the outskirts of Cairo, the Baron and his wife had children. Unfortunately, from the very beginning, they were met with misfortune in that house. Their daughter was insular and suffered from terrible moods. She was found dead in the house's basement shortly after her mother's untimely death. The Baron suffered from epilepsy and died in 1929, and his playboy son frittered away the rest of his money. The Egyptian government eventually came into possession of the house in 2005. It was open to the public for 2 months but closed without any explanation. Weird. Rumours that the palace is haunted have been rife for decades, and now the property sits abandoned. Because of its abandonment, these rumours have only increased. Locals say that the palace is a hotspot for satanic ritual and is host not only to ghosts but also illicit orgies. Crikey. Alright, how random is this? But I checked my Instagram halfway through scripting this video and one of my friends had uploaded a picture of Howard Carter's grave. He's buried in Putney Vale Cemetery, and it was really random to have been talking about him on this list, a curse kind of thing with Egyptology, and then there he was. Weird. Spooky.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have dental surgery. So back in the ancient Egyptian world, it's not like you could just take a quick trip to the dentist to get your teeth checked and cleaned yearly, and the diet of the average ancient Egyptian was most definitely not exactly conducive to having an impeccable set of pearly whites. That's mostly due to the fact that the tools used to grind food would often leave traces of sand and stone behind, which, with their naturally abrasive qualities, would in turn cause tooth loss or troubles at an early age. Through documents found, there have been a few different dental treatments from that time that have been discovered, like topical treatments and such, but one case was able to give us a glimpse into what is believed to be the treatment of an abscess. Even more interesting is a mummy that was found from the 4th dynasty. This mummy, in his first molar, had a bunch of surgically produced holes that they believe were used to drain an abscess, which clearly gives us some very tangible evidence that dental surgeries were in fact happening all those years ago. Before we head into the rest of this list, we also have to remember that all of this was done without anesthetics. They may have had some herbs and that sort of thing to help ease the pain or something like that, but nothing compares to the tools we have now. In our number 9 spot today, we have stitches. Just in general, while surgery did exist during ancient Egyptian times, invasive surgery wasn't quite as common because, well, no painkillers, no antibiotics. The list goes on. One thing that's less invasive but still extremely important that was seen quite a bit during these times, however, was the use of stitches. Ancient Egyptians found different and effective ways to make their own sutures in order to close large wounds. They did so by using plant fibers, hair, tendons, and wool threads as evidenced in different mummified remains that have been discovered. In the oldest known surgical text, which is now referred to as the Edwin Smith Papyrus that came from ancient Egypt, there are 48 different cases of sutures being described. One example from the text of treating a laceration reads, quote, "If thou findest that wound open and its stitching loose, thou should draw together for him the gash with 2 strips of linen." In our number 8 spot today, we have the transition. So no one is quite sure exactly where the origins of this practice come from, but it is thought by some that it may lie with the ancient Egyptians, as it is some of the first examples we have seen. The Egyptians did sometimes practice male circumcision, but it was done for the sake of cleanliness. In our modern world, much of the time, those who choose to undergo this procedure do so at infancy. Well, I guess they don't choose and rather their parents do, which is of course quite a polarizing subject, but regardless, that is the most common practice nowadays, but it wasn't the case back in ancient Egypt. During those times, it was actually performed during a person's pre-adolescent phase, which is what has led experts to believe that it might have been done as part of a ritual to commemorate a transition from boyhood to manhood. It wasn't something that was a sign of social status or class, as based on the preserved bodies that have survived up until now from ancient times, there doesn't seem to be any sort of trend connecting those who went through the surgery and those who didn't. In our number 7 spot today, we have hernia. When we think of modern medical problems and their surgical fixes, it can be hard to imagine how on earth people in ancient times dealt with similar problems, and I gotta say, hernias are one of them. Like, imagine the first person to get a hernia. They were probably so confused. But as it turns out, in ancient Egyptian times, they were already doing surgery to help repair them. Egyptian pharaohs had a group of physicians who worked hard to preserve the health of their ruler, and these physicians, of course, as anyone would hope, needed to have a vast knowledge of the body and how to treat different ailments. In the Egyptian tomb of Ankh-Mahor at Saqqara, which dates back to around 2500 BC, there is an illustrated sculpture of a surgeon performing what is believed to be a circumcision, as well as possibly the reduction of an inguinal hernia. It doesn't stop there though. The mummy of Pharaoh Merneptah, as well as the mummified body of Ramesses V, both showed signs of surgery, likely in an attempt to fix a hernia. Honestly, I never thought that one day I'd be talking about ancient hernias, but the more you know, I guess. In our number 6 spot today, we have magic medicine. Okay, so I'll admit, this one is not a surgery that was performed, but it's really an important part of all ancient Egyptian medical treatments, so of course we have to talk about it. As evidenced by everything on this list, the ancient Egyptians were clearly medically sophisticated, and they used a wide variety of very legitimate treatments, but these were not their primary method of treatment. No, the main treatment was still magic. It was believed that all diseases were caused by the supernatural or by deities, so of course the supernatural was needed to combat it. Like, as an example, let's take whooping cough. So to treat it, they have the medical side, which would have been grounded roasted mouse mixed into milk, which, for a second, let's pause for how horrible that must have been. But the more important part of the treatment would be the lullaby that was said after to help drive off whatever evil spirit was plaguing you. So a little bit of medicine, or mouse I guess, and a little ditty and you're on your way. Not a terrible trip to the doctor. In our number 5 spot today, we have a nose job. Plastic surgery is more widespread now than it ever has been before, but it all got its start long before now in the days of the ancient Egyptians, although of course not in the same way we think of it today. In the Edwin Smith Papyrus, along with a documentation of trauma surgeries, bone fracture fixes, and all of that, the text also showed examples of fixes for nasal injuries. The treatment involved manipulating the nose into the desired position before using wooden splints, lint, swabs, and linen plugs in order to hold it in place. I mean, it's like an ancient nose job. That's crazy. It's truly wild to think about how much the lives of these people helped shape our world today. While so much of their civilization remains a complete mystery to us, what we do know now has helped informed us so much. In our number 4 spot today, we have prosthetics. The ancient Egyptians were a culture of firsts, and some of their achievements we still have no idea how they were able to accomplish, and some of the others just paved the way for the success of us modern humans, and this is just one example of that. It's very likely that some of the first ever prosthetics were used in ancient Egypt. A female mummy who was discovered near Luxor had her death dated somewhere between 950 and 710 BC, and she was also found to have a prosthetic toe made from wood and leather. While this is of course a wonderful cosmetic replacement, and it's no secret that the ancient Egyptians clearly valued aesthetics, it seems as though the prosthetic toe was completely functional and was actually used to help the woman walk. The toe had significant signs of wear, which then inspired experts to start a study. They took participants and tested their gait both with and without the use of a replicated toe. In ancient Egypt, the common footwear was sandals, and walking in them would have been made significantly more difficult without a big toe. It's clear that this prosthetic was very helpful and important to those similar to the Luxor mummy. In our number 3 spot today, we have breaks. So of course, those living in ancient Egypt broke bones or had dislocations sometimes. I mean, those things can be kind of fragile, and they were often doing grueling work, but it's not like they could just head over to Emerge and get an x-ray and a cast and some crutches. So how did they treat broken bones or dislocation? Well, we can look at one example from the Edwin Smith Papyrus where there was a patient with 2 dislocated clavicles. The treatment is described as follows: If thou examinest a man having a dislocation in his 2 collarbones, shouldst thou find his shoulders turned over and the heads of his 2 collarbones turned towards his face. Thou shouldst cause them to fall back so that they rest in their places. Thou shouldst bind it with stiff rolls of linen. Thou shouldst treat it afterward with grease and honey every day until he recovers. Basically, there were some people in ancient Egypt who were really good at setting bones, and to keep them in place once set, they would use wooden splints and linens. On mummies, we have found quite a bit of evidence of fractured bones healing in good positions, but there also have of course been many cases of the opposite. At the end of the day, most fractures heal well in primates and humans without access to orthopedic treatment, so even if the bones weren't set perfectly, they will still heal. It just depends on the break and how these bones healed, what effect on the body it will have afterwards. In our number 2 spot today, we have the mummification process. Many people, especially those with a limited knowledge of ancient Egypt, when they think about it, their minds would go to pyramids and mummies. The pyramids are one of the greatest mysteries of our past, and the mummies we have been able to find and discover are incredible because they've given us the smallest insight into the incredible civilization, but because the ancient Egyptians were so sophisticated in the mummification process, they also got really good at another major creepy kind of surgery. That is the post-mortem dissection. In order to mummify the body, they needed to remove any moisture from it. This process included the removal of brain tissue, which was done through quite a gruesome hook tool. This was not a medical practice, however, and was more of a spiritual one, so it wasn't performed by doctors. This is exactly why, although they were getting extra up close and personal with a person's internal organs during this process, the medical information they gathered during it was never used for any kind of medical treatment or medical advancement. In our number 1 spot today, we have cancer treatment. Cancer is something that is obviously very prevalent in our modern society, and because of the rising rates, it makes us ask ourselves, did cancer exist in ancient times? While they didn't call it that, it definitely did. Some of the earliest evidence of cancer is found in ancient manuscripts, mummies, and fossilized bone tumors that have been found in ancient Egypt. There are a ton of examples and different forms of cancer that have been found, but perhaps the oldest comes from 3000 BC, and it was found in the Edwin Smith papyrus that we talked about many times before. In this text, it describes 8 cases of tumors or ulcers of the breast and how they treated them. Back then, these tumors were removed by cauterization using a tool called a fire drill. Other than this though, the text says in reference to the illness that there is no treatment. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the downfall. To start this list off, let's talk about one of the things that happened just before the transition into the first intermediate period of ancient Egypt. It is important to note some of the causes of the fall of the Old Kingdom, which is what brought forth this period of chaos and turmoil. One reason that is often cited is the extremely long reign of Pepe II, who was the last pharaoh of the 6th dynasty. His reign began while he was a child, and it is believed that he lived to possibly into his 90s, which, like, first of all, that's incredible. Imagine that guy with modern medicine and plumbing. I'm just saying. But, of course, while that's wild to see that long of a reign, especially back in those times, his lengthy life proved to cause some issues for succession because the guy outlived all of his heirs. Because of this sort of disorganization, it led to the regime of the Old Kingdom kind of being disintegrated. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Nile. The overflowing of the Nile was a very important time for ancient Egyptians. It is a super important cycle for them that was actually celebrated annually for 2 weeks. In the intermediate period, it is thought that the overflowing of the Nile, which really was necessary to their way of life, was lessened, or it may have potentially been non-existent for a period due to a drier climate, which is said to have potentially led ancient Egypt and its citizens into a terrible famine. The drier climate and the lack of the Nile inundation would have resulted in lower crop yields, which would have a significant impact on those living in the area at the time. In our number 8 spot today, we have disorganization. Like I kind of mentioned in the first point, part of the reason this intermediate period is often referred to as the Dark Ages is due to the lack of organization within the kingdom. Manetho, who is a historian and priest from the Ptolemaic era, would describe 70 kings who ruled in 70 days. This is likely a bit sarcastic and an exaggeration, but it's meant to show how chaotic things were at the time in terms of leadership. This period of time can sometimes be overlooked in terms of leadership because there is very little known about who was actually leading during this time. It is possible that the 7th dynasty may have been more of an oligarchy, which would have likely been composed of officials of the 6th dynasty. There unfortunately is very little in terms of both textual as well as architectural evidence that survived this period, so much of what really went on remains a secret. In our number 7 spot today, we have artifacts. During the time of the 7th and 8th dynasty, while it is true that we have little to go on, there have been a few interesting artifacts found that are believed to belong to this time period. There have been scarabs that have been found that are believed to have belonged to Neferker II of the 7th dynasty. There was also a green jasper cylinder that is believed to have come from the 8th dynasty. There was even a small pyramid that was constructed by King Ebi of the 8th dynasty that has been identified at Saqqara. While we have found these things, there are some rulers from this time whose positions remain unknown to this day. It is entirely possible that we may never know where some of these rulers lie. In our number 6 spot today we have literature. While this entire period of time is incredibly interesting, one super cool thing is that the emergence of what is considered literature by our more modern standards seems to have occurred during this period of time. This led to the birth of new literary prowess in the Middle Kingdom, the age that came after this period. There is one specific piece that is very important historically, and that is the Ipuwer papyrus. Although this piece of literature is not dated to this period, it is widely believed that it is likely referring to this intermediate period, and it records the decline in both international relations as well as just the general impoverishment that was seen in ancient Egypt at the time. In our number 5 spot today we have nomarchs. Another problem that really contributed to the fall of the Old Kingdom and the introduction into this more difficult period of time was the rise in power of provincial nomarchs. A nomarch was a provincial governor in ancient Egypt. Since the country was divided into 42 different provinces, which were called nomes, there would be a government official that was responsible for each one. Nearing the beginning of the first intermediate period, the position of nomarch had become a hereditary one, which of course meant that one family was likely to hold the position and the power for quite some time. This of course meant that these families, with every year, would only get more powerful and more influential within their nome, which left them becoming more independent from their overall ruler. These nomarchs were beginning to have their own tombs built, and they began putting together their own armies, and of course this went on to create conflict with those surrounding them. This not only created tensions, but it created warfare. In our number 4 spot today we have division. Once things kind of settled from the chaos of the fall of the Old Kingdom and the bizarrities of the 7th and 8th dynasties, it was realized that Egypt was now kind of divided when it came to ruling, as there were two competing power bases. One of those bases was at Heracleopolis, which was located in Lower Egypt, and the other was at Thebes in Upper Egypt. Those in Lower Egypt had their rule for approximately 94 years, and their kings comprised the 9th and 10th dynasties, each with 19 rulers. The founder of the 9th dynasty, Kheti I, is often described as quite an evil and violent ruler who caused a lot of harm to those living in Egypt at the time. It is said that he was, quote, seized with madness, which I'm not entirely sure what that means, but it is likely hinting towards some sort of mental health issue. In the end, it is said that he met his demise at the hands of a crocodile, which, I mean, leaves me with a lot of questions. In our number 3 spot today we have the buffer zone. Within the Heracleopolitan kingdom there was a powerful and wealthy province of Siut, or Asiut, which really rose to prominence during this otherwise difficult time. A new line of nomarchs began to rise out of this area, and they maintained quite a close relationship with the kings of Lower Egypt. We were able to discover this through what was inscribed on their tombs. These inscriptions provided a look into what the political situations were like during their reigns, and it describes this line of nomarchs as digging canals, reducing taxation, reaping rich harvests, raising cattle herds, and maintaining an army and fleet. Again, we are talking about a time that is referred to as the Dark Ages, so this sort of success was a big deal. Despite this thriving political situation, the Siut province acted as a sort of buffer zone between the dueling Upper and Lower Egypt, which means that it also bore a lot of the brunt of the attacks that were coming down to Lower Egypt from Thebes. In our number 2 spot today we have the Upper Egypt rulers. We spoke briefly about those who were ruling Lower Egypt at the time, so what about Upper Egypt? Well, the Theban kings are said to have been descendants of Intef, who is the nomarch of Thebes, often referred to as the keeper of the door to the south. Intef is often credited with organizing Upper Egypt into the independent ruling body from the south that it went on to become, but despite this it doesn't appear as though he ever tried to claim the title of king himself. Intef II began the attack of northern Egypt, and his successor Intef III completed that attack, which then left him to begin the move into Middle Egypt and the attack on Lower Egypt. The first 3 kings of the 11th dynasty, all named Intef, would also become the last 3 kings of the first intermediate period. In our number 1 spot today we have the Middle Kingdom. With all of the political chaos that was going on and with the competition for power, this resulted in a lot of violence. Prior to the military conflict, it is said that temples were pillaged, artwork was vandalized, and statues of different kings were destroyed. After the reign of the Intefs, they were succeeded by a line of kings who were called Mentuhotep. The second in this line is the ruler who would go on to eventually defeat the kings and rulers of Lower Egypt, those in the Heracleopolitan kingdom. This is important because it marked a new shift in ancient Egypt. This defeat marked the unification of the country, the continuation of the 11th dynasty, and it brought Egypt into the time of the Middle Kingdom.
Starting off this countdown, we have George Herbert. The scariest story about King Tut and his treasure would have to be the one that involves a man named George Herbert. George was the man that financed the excavation of King Tut's tomb, led by Howard Carter. If it wasn't for him, they wouldn't have had the finances to do this. Maybe that's why he was the first man that died as a result of Tut's curse. Several weeks after the opening of the tomb, he accidentally cut open a mosquito bite that was on his cheek. He cut it open while shaving. It ended up getting infected and he died of blood poisoning shortly after. What a freaky coincidence if you ask me. Story also goes that when George died, all the lights in his house mysteriously went out. Creepy. In our 9th spot, we have King Tut's body. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Probably one of the greatest treasures in King Tut's tomb was King Tut himself. He was buried in a coffin, placed inside another coffin, placed inside another coffin. In total, there were about 8 coffins. The legend goes that anyone that handles King Tut's body or his artifacts, they're gonna get cursed. After Tut's body was found, he was sent to a radiologist to get x-rayed. The radiologist's name was Sir Archibald Douglas Reed. The next day, after conducting the x-ray, Reed fell mysteriously sick. He died 3 days later. His death is blamed on King Tut's curse. I mean, come on, what are the odds? His sickness came out of nowhere. What caused it if it's not the curse? In our 8th spot, we have the weird findings. Of course, King Tut's tomb is filled with an abundance of treasure. In total, it apparently contained 5,398 artifacts. But there were also a couple of scary and weird items found in the tomb. For starters, there were over 100 baskets with barley, figs, grapes, melons, etc. Now, the dead were often buried with food so that they would have an abundance with them in the afterlife. But also, it was for their journey if they got hungry along the way. There were also tons of glasses of wine in there. I wonder if anyone took a sip after all those years. Spoiler alert, there was no curse. Those men died because they all dared each other to take a sip of that ancient wine. Just kidding. On the more disturbing note, there was a jar that held his mummified stomach. Yum. And there were also 145 loincloths. That man must have liked feeling secure down there. Seriously, who needs that many? Also, apparently they were super well made compared to other loincloths they found. So, only the finest for King Tut's Tut. In our 7th spot, we have the secret burial chamber. It's believed that there's more to be discovered in King Tut's tomb. Some researchers believe that his tomb contains access to a hidden chamber with possibly more buried treasure. The idea was first proposed by Nicholas Reeves, a British Egyptologist. He thought maybe the tomb had a hidden chamber for Queen Nefertiti, and the location of Nefertiti's tomb has been a mystery for quite some time now. In 2015, a radar scan showed that there were 2 empty areas behind some painted murals in King Tut's tomb. These murals depicted burial rituals, so they for sure thought that something was behind it. Then sadly in 2018, a team of archaeologists found evidence that showed this wasn't the case and that there was no chamber behind the tomb. Everyone was disappointed. But ladies and gentlemen, they did not give up. And now after several more tests, they believe there is something on the other side of the north wall of the burial chamber. How exciting. But if it is Nefertiti's tomb, people believe that it will be heavily guarded or booby-trapped. I mean, they hid it away for a reason. They didn't want anyone finding it. Moving on, at number 6, we have the chariot. One really cool artifact found in King Tut's tomb was a chariot. Now, what makes this significant is that it's theorized that the chariot might have been King Tut's cause of death. which has been debated on for years. No one really knows how he died. But King Tut was found with a fractured lower leg, shattered pelvis, and ribs. A new analysis shows that he was crushed on one side of his body while likely on his knees. So some believe that he fell from his chariot in a horrific accident and died. If this is the case and that's the cause of King Tut's death, then that thing is most certainly cursed. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Hugh Evelyn White. Here's another very creepy story. Hugh Evelyn White was a British archaeologist that helped excavate the site. Sadly, the curse got to him as well. 24 of the excavators ended up dying. Evelyn was scared that this was because of the curse and thought that he was next. As a result, he hung himself. He was found with a message written in his own blood. The message read, "I have succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." Poor dude. In our 4th spot, we have James Henry Breasted. Okay, this next story is pretty wild, so just prepare yourself. So James Henry Breasted was a famous Egyptologist and archaeologist that worked alongside Howard Carter. Now apparently when they opened the tomb, they said it looked like it had been robbed and some items were missing. In particular, King Tut's cobra staff. But a lot of people think that this was just a cover-up, and Breasted and the other team members took a couple of artifacts for themselves. And guess what? Here's where it gets freaky. When Breasted returned home, he found that his pet canary was eaten by a cobra, and the cobra was still occupying the cage. Cobra staff goes missing, and a cobra is found in his home. Coincidence? Seems a little fishy, not gonna lie. On top of that, the cobra is a symbol of the Egyptian monarchy. Also, kings had it on their headdresses to represent protection. So this has led people to believe that this is a symbol of how the king strikes his enemies, and that King Tut's curse is coming for him and his team. In our 3rd spot, we have the burial mask. Now, it's called the burial mask because it's a mask that they place on someone when they're getting buried. It's also sometimes called the death mask, which sounds so much scarier. Anyways, these masks were made to resemble the person that it was placed on. It was done so that spirits could recognize the body after death and help them get to the underworld. Not only that, but at the back of the mask, there was a protective spell inscribed into it. The spell was to protect Tut's limbs as he travels to the underworld. But Tut's beard on the mask was accidentally snapped off, and then they glued it back on. This was believed to anger King Tut, because not only did they remove a protective mask from his body, but they also broke it too. So apparently he's coming for these people involved in that, if he hasn't gotten to them already. In our 2nd spot, we have the missing heart. So let's get straight to the point with this one. King Tut's heart is missing. The Egyptians did place some of his organs inside canopic jars, but the heart was important to them. They believed that the heart was required for someone to get to the afterlife, so it was always left in place. If it was accidentally removed, it was always put back in and immediately sewn shut. But King Tut's heart is missing. Now, there are a couple of theories that could explain why this is. Number 1, maybe his undertakers were careless. Number 2, it may be that King Tut died far away from home. By the time he was set to be preserved, his heart may have already decayed. Or number 3, some sicko stole his heart. Who really knows? It's just pretty creepy if you really think about it. And in our number 1 spot, we have the mysterious fires. Here we have more victims of King Tut's curse. First up is Aaron Ember. Aaron was friends with many of the men that went into King Tut's tomb. In 1926, his house mysteriously caught on fire and burned down. He perished alongside it. Now, he would have made it out successfully, but his wife told him to save the manuscript that he had been working on. The manuscript was called the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Another pretty freaky coincidence. Anyways, he's not the only one whose house was burned down mysteriously. Let's move on to Sir Bruce Ingham. He was gifted a paperweight from Howard Carter, the archaeologist who discovered King Tut's tomb. But the paperweight was a mummified hand wearing a bracelet. The bracelet had this carved into it, and I quote, "Cursed be he who moves the body." Don't know why Howard thought that was a good gift, but whatever. After receiving the gift, Bruce's house burned down to the ground. He then tried to rebuild it, but it was destroyed in a flood. Could these stories be a result of King Tut's curse? Let me know what you think in the comments below.
Number 10. the Altamura caveman. When researchers were exploring the cave of Lamalunga beneath the Italian town of Altamura, they were hoping to learn more about how the cave had been formed and its history. As they gazed around the limestone walls, their flashlights crossed a peculiar formation. It wasn't something normally formed in a cave, but appeared to be limestone nonetheless. Clambering over to investigate, these researchers soon realized that they were looking at no stone, no stalactite or gmite, but a skull. Indeed, this skull was ribbed with stony formations, the years of limestone dripping onto its face, allowing it to have the appearance of the surrounding walls. The body was investigated by more researchers and discovered to be a Neanderthal, the skeleton perfectly preserved by the cave's stagnant environment. How many visitors had visited this cave without knowing what secrets it held? Number 9. The Hubei Caves. We haven't crawled out of these caves yet, as our next stop on this ancient tour is Hubei, a province in China. When archaeologists explored a remote area near the Three Gorges Dam, they found a series of strange holes cut into a sheer wall of stone. Each hole was roughly cut, rectangular, and fairly deep. There's also the detail of the coffins that were sticking out of them. Yes, it seems that whoever built this ancient site did so with the intention of burying their dead inside of it. This correlates with theories of the time about how it was considered dangerous for people to bury their dead in the ground, for fear of animals stealing grandma for dinner. As a result, these coffins were designed to prevent animals from getting an easy meal, though it's unknown exactly how the coffins were carried to their locations. Carbon dating reveals that these burials were likely carried out by the Bo people, an ancient Chinese ethnic minority which was present during the Tang dynasty. Number 8. The Gaelic Tree Mystery. In 2015, harsh winds were responsible for uprooting a 200-year-old tree and a 1,000-year-old mystery. Located in Ireland, farmers were recovering from a recent windstorm when they went in to inspect the damages. It was likely a sobering sight to see a tree they might have known as a source of comfort or a location for friendly picnicking violently uprooted and slaughtered by the wind. What was then more immediately sobering was the skeleton found tangled in its roots. Hiring archaeologists, it was quickly revealed that the remains were of a young Gaelic man, roughly 1,000 years old. Despite his skeletal disposition, clear evidence of knife wounds were visible on his ribs and hand. Whether buried by his family or his murderer, none can say, and the case remains open to this day. Number 7. The Jigsaw Mummies. We're taking a much shorter trip around the world to Scotland, specifically southeast. This discovery honestly ought to be a fairly standard affair. Mummies and mummification have been widespread for an extremely long time. In general, mummies are mostly made through the dehydration of a corpse's flesh, which allows them to retain some of their appearance that they had in life. Bandages are not required. As a result, there are actually hundreds of mummies around the world, as depending on the environment of their burial, they could just accidentally end up that way. Egypt was the most famous for theirs because they were the first to dehydrate corpses on purpose, which is now wrong thanks to this discovery. As the mummies were investigated, it was revealed that they were deliberately mummified. Not only that, but more disturbingly, they weren't all the same. Analyzing the strange makeup of their body structure led researchers to realize that the mummies were actually constructed from multiple different bodies, each one using different parts. Number 6. The Hands of Egypt. On the topic of Egypt, which we briefly were, another secret was uncovered in the city of Avaris. Undertaking the excavation of the ancient and ominously named city, researchers discovered several pits in front of the palace, filled with 16 human hands. More interestingly, every single hand was a right hand. The reason for this is attributed to that hand having cultural significance within ancient Egyptian culture, where the removal of a hand from an enemy combatant would allow a soldier to prove their victory. They could then exchange the hand for gold. Whether or not the disarmed opponent was dead or alive was apparently left up to the victor, as lacking their left hand would forever prevent them from participating in conflicts ever again, and mark them as a failure. Number 5. The Leper Warrior. warriors. Found within an ancient Italian cemetery, the bones of a warrior revealed a startling reality of the ancient military orders of the time. Prior to the establishment of cities within the region, nomadic peoples found themselves in constant conflict. That, mixed with the issue of leprosy and the lack of medical capabilities to treat it, led to drastic solutions which hoped to solve the issue. Not by curing leprosy, but by ensuring its victims could go out swinging. Employing lepers as warriors, these soldiers raged their way through the battlefield. The idea of hesitation, an out-of-style instinct when their life was already in the hands of God. One corpse from Campacharo even showed evidence of having survived a direct strike to the skull from an opponent's mace, and the after effects of ancient attempts at brain surgery. Pretty sick if you ask me. Number 4. Monk in a statue. While this image may have made its way around the internet, the story behind it certainly has not. When a trader of ancient Chinese relics sent his newly acquired golden statue of a sitting Buddha to an expert in order to restore it to its original splendor, they were shocked to discover that the statue contained a mummified corpse. When unwrapping this terrible gift, the name of the corpse was found to have been written on a bundle of cloth, dubbing the man as the monk Li Kan. This gave evidence to theories of how the process of self-mummification rose to popularity, where the living person would slowly poison themselves to make their body too toxic for even maggots to eat. Anyone who completed the ritual would be revered and worshipped, their body encased in gold. So then, how many more of these statues might be needing a little x-ray? Number 3. Vampire burials. Honestly, I just want this to be a cover for a metal album. When digging up a mass grave in Venice, of which there are probably thousands, one corpse stood out as slightly unusual to archaeologists. Buried with a massive chunk of stone in her mouth, the corpse was confirmed to have been buried around the time of the bubonic plague. Since handling corpses would have been extremely stupid at the time, scientists decided to run a little investigation into the matter. Their results concluded that whoever had buried the woman believed that she might have been a vampire, and placed the stone in her mouth to prevent her from snacking on plague victims. This is similar to the Polish vampire burials that were also recently uncovered, where a woman was buried with a modified sickle placed around her neck. That's so metal. Number 2. Persian chemical warfare. When 19 Roman soldiers stormed a Persian tunnel, what they were met with would change the world forever in about 2,000 years. A wall of smoke enveloped them, melting their lungs. Their bodies would be found years later, desperately clawing at their armor. What this is attributed to is an ancient chemical weapon constructed from sulfur and bitumen being thrown into a fire. The smoke was then directed up into the tunnels, where it would turn into acid once breathed in by anyone who contacted it. A starkly brutal weapon and a reminder of the horrors of war. Number 1. Incorruptibility. This strange practice is generally held as a strong belief by the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox denominations of Catholicism. The idea is that if a corpse is seen as incorruptible, they must be a saint, and the process of making a saint requires examination and bureaucracy. If judged well, the body is sealed in wax and put on display, where worshippers will gather around to view the holy figure. This practice has largely ceased in the modern era, but the bodies of saints are still on display to this day, their forms freely available for all to see. It's kind of weird.